Chapter 251. After the dust settles, ch 271. When was the last time you've seen your wife? Maverick asked, eyeing Howard. Although outwardly there didn't seem to be anything wrong with him, Maverick could still sense the fatigue the man kept bottled up inside. Maria, Howard tilted his head slightly. What does that have to do with anything? I'm asking, when was the last time you were anywhere but here? Fine, 2 days back. Howard waved his hand, exhaling. If you must know, I've got a date with my wife, tonight. Maverick ignored the last part of his answer and asked again. And while you were at home, did you not watch the news? What are you on about? Howard asked again, looking more puzzled. Did something big happen recently? The news, Howard. Sighing, Howard finally took a moment to think, then answered. The only thing of interest, let's see. He rubbed his chin. Was probably the reports about some joint nations weapons test being conducted in China. He paused, then looked at Maverick, suddenly thinking of something and asking with a skeptical look, or does it have something to do with you wizard lot? Finally, Maverick smiled. Yes. He didn't bother to hide it or keep the suspense anymore. Something big happened, and it brought together not just us. It was a joint operation carried out by the entire world. Magicals, non-magicals, even mutants working together. I see, said Howard, then just a beat later he asked more sharply. Wait, what? What could possibly bring all of you into one group? A very, very powerful, Maverick started, then paused and changed his wording. No troublesome enemy, I'll let you guess. Once, he added teasingly. Troublesome, Howard thought for a moment. Could it be that one of your high counselors rebelled, turned into a terrorist like the madman from the war? Maverick's eye twitched. Well, can't really blame him for putting the magicals first on the suspect list. Shaking his head, Maverick corrected him. No, it has nothing to do with us. Okay, then what is it? The news called it a weapons test. Some networks even showed footage of the aftermath, and if any of that's real, I'd say nukes were deployed. Probably more than one. It was aliens, Maverick finally said. Howard's mouth hung open momentarily, wordless, then his eyes widened. You're not lying. He didn't think Maverick would joke about something like that. Why, with everything you know, is it so hard to believe in the existence of aliens? No, you bastard. Howard's voice suddenly rose a pitch, and he stretched out his arm, pointing a finger at Maverick as if accusing him of some grave offense. I'm not surprised knowing there are aliens. I'm a scientist, he said, sounding genuinely wronged. I'm upset because while all that was happening, you never thought to call me. At Howard's tantrum, Maverick's expression didn't change, and he just stared at him blankly. Inwardly, however, he felt a little awkward. Indeed, he really did forget all about him in the heat of everything. Everything happened too fast, and besides, what could you do even if you knew about it? That's not the point, Howard said, rubbing his face with both hands dejectedly before slumping into the sofa. Aliens, man, he muttered after a moment. How could I, the #1 scientist in the world, miss something like that? Saying that, he tilted his head back, leaning against the sofa and staring at the ceiling. He really looked like he had just been told the worst news in the world, or like a child who had just lost their favorite pet. Anyway, that brings us to my new friend here, Maverick said after a moment of silence, making Howard, who was staring upward, darken one eye toward their direction. What about him? He is an alien, Maverick said matter-of-factly. But contrary to what he expected, Howard's expression didn't change. He only leaned forward slowly, narrowing his eyes at Norex, then glanced back at Maverick questioningly. Oh, right, Maverick suddenly realized the issue and turned to Norex. Change back. Moments later, seeing a perfectly normal-looking human suddenly change into a green, rough-skinned, medieval, bald-looking elf, the genius scientist, temporarily not a billionaire, did not overreact like a normal person should at such a sight. His eyes only widened for a moment before he swallowed his shock and turned his head slightly back to Maverick. You're not messing with me, right? This isn't some of your hocus-pocus magic. He's an actual alien from outer space. Actually, that was a perfectly reasonable question to ask. After all, Howard had seen enough and by now knew very well what magic was capable of as well as what Maverick himself could do. He's a legit, green-blooded alien, Maverick answered. Then, instead of explaining the rest, he figured it was better to just show him. His species are called Skrull. As the lights dimmed and the room around them began to blur, Maverick started explaining everything that had happened over the past couple of weeks. About an hour later, the vision in the room faded, the last scene showing clear blue skies and two small, shuttle-like spaceships streaking upward like bullets, the moment Danvers and Talos left Earth to explore the universe. The illusion then dissipated, and everything inside the room returned to normal. If the two of them eventually do stumble upon the technology we're researching, it could save us a lot of time, maybe even all of it. The room was quiet. Norex was still mesmerized, or perhaps stunned by the incredible experience of witnessing something in such lifelike detail. Howard, on the other hand, had seen enough not to be easily shaken, though his mind was now deep in thought, processing everything he had just learned. "That's a big if," Howard said after a moment, then put on that same stubborn look from earlier. "Forget about it for now." He shook his head, exhaling. "I'm still upset you didn't include me. I mean, even S.H.I.E.L.D. agents were there. Heck, there was a random woman too." "That random woman is Danvers's friend," Maverick explained without changing his expression. "But if it makes you feel any better, next time a random alien army shows up, you'll be the first one I call." Of course, that was nonsense. After all, how often do random alien armies show up on Earth? Wait, this is Marvel, so maybe it technically can't be called nonsense, right? He mused inwardly. Besides, by now, he understood why this guy kept complaining. What else could it be but coveting the tech? Howard gave only an unimpressed, unsatisfied look, his eyes half open as he stared at Maverick. A moment later, he asked, "How much tech did you manage to secure? I want to study it, all of it." Straightening up, he finally got to the point. Smiling, Maverick replied, "First of all, I didn't steal anything. It's called spoils of war." "Whatever, potato." Howard waved his hand dismissively. "How many of those smaller shuttles did you scavenge, really?" "I have enough," Maverick answered vaguely after a moment, then his expression turned serious. "But I'm thinking, after I hand them over for you to research, you might disregard the real project I gave you, and I can't have that." Howard opened his mouth to retort, but closed it a moment later. What Maverick said wasn't wrong. He was, after all, first and foremost, a fanatic scientist. And a fanatic scientist getting the opportunity to research advanced alien tech could indeed turn out exactly as Maverick predicted. "That's why I brought this guy to be your partner in research," Maverick continued. "The research on the alien tech will mainly be done by him, while you continue with the Mars project. Of course, you can join in as well, and Norex here will share everything with you, and you likewise. As for what I have a lot, honestly. From alien battle suits to energy blaster weapons, space shuttles, and even," he paused for a moment and added, "an Imperial cruiser. That's their mothership, the big behemoth spaceship you saw in the illusion." At this point, Howard's eyes had widened so much it looked like they might pop out. Gold mine. For a scientist, this was a gold mine. So much? Where? He wanted to see them, study them inside and out right then and there, but Maverick raised a hand to stop before he might actually start drooling on the table. "I'll get to that, but first, listen. Here's the plan. You and my new friend here will work together on both tasks. Start with the spacesuits, improve the ones we'll be using on Mars when we get there. And as for the spaceships, I honestly don't even know where to begin, but there's plenty for you to study and replicate for the Mars mission. My point is," he emphasized, "don't lose sight of the main objective. Everything has to ultimately serve the Mars mission." A moment of silence stretched across the office before Howard finally exhaled, collected himself, and leaned back. "I get it." He paused, seemingly lost in thought, then continued, "Actually, we've already explored some theories. Not for full-scale terraforming yet, but for setting up a temporary base. A large, self-sustaining structure that can endure harsh conditions and extreme weather. A kind of sustainable ecosystem pocket. It's still on the drawing board, and I was waiting until we had a solid, foolproof plan before bringing you in for a proper briefing." Anyway, Howard thought, if he wanted to get his hands on the alien tech, he had to offer something in return. Moreover, what he said wasn't made up. That was exactly what he and his team had been working on for the past few months. Oh, Maverick raised a brow and leaned back as well. How large is this self-sustaining base going to be? About a kilometer, calling it safe. My point is, once we establish a base there, the real research on terraforming can begin. Only by studying the planet on site can we conduct proper analysis. Right now, what we're doing is perfecting a way to live there and actually survive comfortably. Maverick nodded thoughtfully after listening. Makes sense. After all, the data on Mars so far only came from readings gathered through telescopic observations. But from the planet itself, they could study, collect more accurate and comprehensive data, and only then could the real research begin. Very well then, I'll hand over every piece of alien tech I have with me for you two to study, he said with a final nod, his mind made up. But before that, I'll have my team expand the base. The mothership alone is about the size of a football stadium, so it'll take a while to get things ready. The smaller shuttles and the rest of the tech, though, I'll hand those over today before I leave. Glancing sideways, he added, "The first thing I want you to do, Norex, is completely remove any signals that might be sent out. I also have a captured Kree soldier who knows everything about the ship's operational procedures, so if you need to clear anything or decrypt something, just give me a call." He had kept the Kree lieutenant alive precisely, because there might still be encryptions Norex would need to crack or could not decrypt on his own. Obviously, there would be secure protocols buried within the system, and Maverick had no intention of using the Kree ship for anything until he was certain it was completely under his control. Time passed slowly. After finalizing a rough plan, Norex was then taken to meet the rest of the team working on the project. Maverick joined as well, surveying the work they had been doing over the past few months, ever since his Earth-made spaceship was launched en route to Mars. There was still a little over a month until it reached the Red Planet, and after that, the real mission would begin. As Howard had said, actual terraforming research could only begin once they were on the Red Planet's surface. As for why Maverick didn't just use a Kree pod to get there immediately, well, he could have, but he chose not to. At least in these early stages, he wanted the project to rely purely on Earth-made technology, with no alien interference. Call it pride or whatever, he didn't care. After the briefing, Maverick no longer lingered in the lab and chose to leave. Norex, however, stayed with Howard. Unsurprisingly, the two scientists hit it off remarkably quickly. Greenland. Far to the north, approaching the Arctic Circle, vast icefields stretch as far as the eye can see, broken only by jagged ice formations and ridges that rise like frozen towers against the pale gray sky. A bitter wind sweeps across the landscape, chilling to the bone and carrying flakes of snow that sting any exposed skin. The emptiness feels endless, a silent, frozen wilderness at the edge of the world. Here, at the northern tip of this small continental land, buried beneath layers of snow, ice, and rock, a hidden chamber lay, shrouded in silence. The ceiling lights bathed the chamber in a gentle glow, when suddenly the fabric of space warped and a figure emerged, accompanied by a low, resonant hum. Without a pause, Maverick strode down the long, empty hallway, the soft thud of his shoes on the floor the only sound breaking the silence. At a glance, the space seemed like a perfect cuboid, metallic, plain, and bare in every direction, and Maverick stopped at the far end facing what appeared to be a solid wall. Yes, at a glance it looked like a solid wall, but to him, every surface and space in this place was anything but empty. Next, he raised a hand, tracing symbols in the air while murmuring in an unfamiliar tongue. In response, the wall seemed to have shimmered to life, lines of light weaving into intricate patterns that grew brighter until a rectangular section slid open, revealing the space beyond. Contrary to the plain, unremarkable space behind him, what lay before him was like stepping into the open. Clear skies stretched above, lush greenery spread across the landscape, and a lake glimmered in the distance. In the distance, birds and animals could be seen moving about, some predators and some prey, forming an ecosystem of their own. In fact, it was a self-sustaining miniature ecosystem, where only the sky and the sun were simulated, while everything else was as real as it could get. He didn't stay long inside. Stepping out, he walked to another section of the plain metallic wall and repeated the same motion as before. Once again, an opening formed on its own, and he stepped inside, only this time he wasn't alone. The soft sound of a meow broke the silence, and looking down, he saw a red ginger cat weaving between his legs. He smiled and let it brush past him, a small, grounding moment in the otherwise sterile chamber. A few more steps forward, and his face was bathed in a bluish glow, his eyes trembling ever so slightly as they locked onto the source. Only for a moment, though, before calm returned to his expression. Reflected in his pupils was a small glass chamber holding a luminescent object, the tesseract. This was his personal sanctuary, a hideout crafted in secrecy and known to no one. A fortress of solitude, carved deep into the northernmost reaches of the world. Hidden beneath layers of earth and ice, it housed things and secrets that, otherwise, his cheat system was unable to accommodate. The tesseract, for example, was the most important item here, and it would remain so for the next 10 years until he could replicate the space laws from the space gem. After that, well, time would tell. Besides serving as a storage for super rare items, it was also a prison, and right now, a captured Kree soldier was the only occupant confined in one of the rooms. And of course, there was Goose. The first room he entered was a replica he had created after seeing Newt's briefcase, thinking a place like that might come in handy someday, and who would have thought it would be needed sooner than he expected. Goose, therefore, was technically not a prisoner. In fact, the cat was probably living a pretty happy life, reigning at the top of the food chain in the ecosystem pocket. If it were a regular cat, Maverick was certain it would be a very fat one by now. Anyway, until he fully understood the seemingly harmless kitties, tentacle trigger conditions, and figured out a way to control them, there was no way it would be allowed outside, let alone left with someone else. Leaving it unattended was out of the question. At the same time, Goose wasn't going to stay here forever either. But first, he wanted to see if he could control it completely. Who knows, maybe eventually have it as a proper pet. After all, it was cute. If he couldn't control it, then unfortunately, the cat would have to go. There were still a few days left before school started, so he decided his next stop would be Camertage. If there was anyone on this planet who could figure out how to fully tame a flurkin, it would most certainly be the Sorcerer Supreme. If not, well, he'd hand the cat over to her to do as she wished. Still, he hoped she could. He liked the cat and wanted it to be his pet. After all, one never knows when a dangerous enemy might need to be swallowed whole. Come on, Goose. He lifted the cat into his arms and snuggled it, smiling. Leaving the tesseract behind, he sealed the chamber, and a portal materialized in front of him, opening a path to Nepal. Let's go meet a bald auntie. Chapter 252. A New Semester in Motion, Ch 272. Hogwarts. Sunlight streamed through the tall, arched windows of the headmaster's office, filling the room with a soft, golden warmth despite the thick layers of snow blanketing the castle grounds. It was another beautiful morning, and Headmaster Albus Dumbledore sat behind his large, ornate desk, a cup of something undoubtedly sweet resting before him, while his magical companion, Fawkes, purred softly, feathers fluffed and eyes closed, perched on his stand in peaceful slumber. Accompanying him across the desk, his deputy, Minerva McGonagall, sat in her usual composed posture, while beside her, Maverick leaned back slightly in his chair, the three of them appearing to share just another light-hearted morning conversation. I didn't take you for a cat person, professor, or any pet, as a matter of fact. Looking at the red ginger cat resting peacefully on Maverick's lap as he rubbed its back, Dumbledore's eyes couldn't help but twinkle inquisitively. Yes, well, you were wrong then, Headmaster. Will she be a permanent resident then? McGonagall also glanced over, smiling. How'd you know it's a she? Raising an eyebrow, Maverick asked. He was genuinely a little surprised. He had only just returned to Hogwarts, first from Camertage, and then after spending some time with his family back home. He was certain McGonagall had never seen Goose before, not even in the illusions he had shown everyone a few weeks earlier during the briefings at Maria's house. When he arrived, unsurprisingly, he was summoned to the headmaster's office as soon as he passed the wards, before he even reached his chamber. You forget, Professor, she said with a teasing smirk, who you're talking to. No cat can fool me, she added rather confidently. Apparently, this one had. Of course, Maverick didn't say it out loud, just shrugged, letting her win her way, then turned to Dumbledore again. So, is there something urgent happening? Nothing in particular, Dumbledore answered, then pushed the newspaper on the desk to his side. I was wondering if you've seen the recent news. With a questioning look, Maverick nudged the paper toward himself and took a look. On the front page, as it had been for the past few days, was an article about what happened in China over the desert. I like the picture, he said, looking at the moving photograph of himself, in fact, captured from the side as he summoned eldritch magic into a colossal ring of blades. Is this a new magic or transfiguration at the highest level? He read the headline aloud, then put the paper down and looked back at Dumbledore. I've seen my face more times than I can count these past few days, so I've been avoiding them for now, he said with a chuckle. Merlin, I'd rather not end up a narcissist like Lockhart. Lockhart was a fraud, Professor, which you are not. McGonagall also chuckled and picked up the newspaper, folding the first page, then the next, to the third. Here, she said, handing him the paper again. Taking the paper from her hand and shrugging lightly, he glanced at the contents again. The first failure by the new administration. Infamous murderer Peter Pettigrew, found dead in prison cell. In a shocking turn of events, convicted murderer Peter Pettigrew was found dead inside his prison cell shortly after a visit from his mother, Mabel Pettigrew. Authorities have ruled the incident a suicide, though many question whether that is truly the case. Was this a final act of mercy from a grieving mother? Sources within the ministry whisper that Mabel Pettigrew may have played a part in her son's death. Whether through a colorless poison or an unforgivable curse that severed his soul, one thing is certain. Peter Pettigrew's torment inside the prison has come to an unexpected and mysterious end. Maverick read part of the article aloud, then put it down. Of course, he already knew exactly what had happened long before the newspapers got wind of it, but he was simply playing along. Pettigrew's mother had applied to visit Azkaban not once but twice. The first time was a normal visit, but the second time? Well, let's just say the apparently dead body of Peter was not exactly him. And likewise, the woman in question was not exactly Peter's mother anymore, and someone else. Everything had happened under Greengrass's absolute supervision, and even the aftermath, from leaks to the report by the Daily Prophet, was orchestrated by him. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been buried on the third page of the paper. While the article suggested that Peter's mother might have convinced the rat to end his life or even taken part directly, the truth was far from it. The rat's mother had offered to switch places with her son, call it maternal sacrifice. In other words, it was indeed a mother's mercy, or rather, a sacrifice for her son. Of course, she couldn't have done that so smoothly if the guards hadn't been told to look the other way. There was no compulsion involved, and it was purely her own decision. It wasn't exactly how Maverick had planned to make the rat escape, but the perfect solution had delivered itself on a silver platter, so he simply asked Greengrass to close one eye. Tragic, for the mother, of course, Maverick remarked after a moment. I wouldn't exactly call it mercy, though. The rat deserves no mercy. He paused, then glanced at Dumbledore. Wouldn't you think so, Headmaster? He didn't really care whether Dumbledore suspected something was off. Either way, he would find out soon enough. Would you really like to hear my thoughts on it, Professor? Dumbledore asked after a moment, giving him a knowing smile. Maverick waved a hand. No, not really. Is this why you called me to your office, Headmaster? The smile on the old man grew even wider, but Maverick didn't budge and kept a straight face. Okay, now Maverick was fairly sure that this old fox had at least deduced something wasn't quite right about the supposed suicide. But unless he asked directly, and even then, Maverick would feign ignorance. Will the two of you not do that in front of me, please? After a stretch of silence, McGonagall finally interrupted their quiet exchange and complained. And no, Professor, we did not ask you to come because of the article, she said, turning to Maverick. Please, I'm all ears, Maverick said, lifting his shoulders slightly. McGonagall then glanced once more at Dumbledore and turned back to Maverick again, deciding she would lead the discussion from here. It was mostly about the lesson plans for the remainder of the semester, and that he should be prepared for some very, very enthusiastic questions from students during the first few days. The talk of the magical world was still about the sky-shattering battle that took place a few weeks ago, and they, being the main figures of the operation, would undoubtedly be sought out the most. Dumbledore, McGonagall, and even Flitwick had been avoiding reporters until now, returning to Hogwarts and never appearing in public, at least not as themselves, so none of their comments had been published. The same went for Maverick, though he wasn't exactly avoiding reporters. He was simply busy in places they could not find him. Obviously, the young witches and wizards would be impatient to hear about everything from them, which unfortunately couldn't be avoided. They would just have to endure it for a few days until the buzz faded away. "There's one last, very important matter," McGonagall said at the end. "Discussions have begun between the three major schools of Europe, Beauxbatons, Durmstrang, and Hogwarts, about holding a grand event next year. Igor proposed the idea, saying he drew inspiration from the inter-school Quidditch tournament to create a truly magical competition between the three schools." Oh, Maverick was intrigued and looked between the two of them. What does Headmaster Karkaroff have in mind? Of course, he already had a guess, but he didn't expect the reason behind it to be inspiration from the inter-school tournament he started. "Have you heard about the Triwizard Tournament?" asked Dumbledore, looking at Maverick. "I have, but wasn't it stopped because of the loose regulations and many safety risks involved?" "It was," McGonagall answered from the side, "but that was a long time ago, and regulations can be changed. So can safety measures." "Indeed," Dumbledore chimed in. "In any case, it promises to be a delightful event, much like the inter-school Quidditch tournament. One that could bring the students of our school's four houses into an even more harmonious atmosphere than it already has." Maverick nodded, then after a moment asked again, "What are the proposed changes discussed so far?" "For starters," McGonagall explained enthusiastically, "we're thinking of creating a brand new Triwizard Cup, or at least removing its old, binding rules. Anything uncontrollable or too dangerous for the organizers to handle will be dropped. That said, it cannot be any less thrilling than before. We have also proposed raising the security standards even higher. With that in place, we could also remove the age restriction, or at least lower it slightly." "Still, talks are on the table, not finalized," Dumbledore added, then smiling at Maverick, he asked, "Would you like to join us for the next meeting?" "No," Maverick quickly cut him off, raising a hand. "I'm sorry, Headmaster, I have too much on my plate. Businessman turned full-time teacher and all that. Especially next year, I can't worry about anything else, since many new projects from my companies, both in the Muggle and magical spheres, are planned to launch." Both Dumbledore and McGonagall sighed at the same time. However, Maverick didn't change his expression, no matter how much air the two old foxes exhaled. A moment later, Dumbledore said, "Very well then. How would you feel about joining the judges' panel? Surely that won't take much of your valuable time." "Wasn't it supposed to be one judge from each school?" Maverick asked, puzzled. "That was before, and now it's under discussion. While we're making changes to the participants, their ages, perhaps even their numbers, we might as well increase the number of judges," he explained, and having said that, he waited for Maverick's response. Damn, this old man is really pushing it. Exhaling, Maverick finally nodded. "As a judge, fine, but that's it. Don't throw any other responsibilities my way." "Wonderful," McGonagall exclaimed brightly. "And I hope you wouldn't mind lending your team to help us cover the tournament. You know, broadcasting the events through your fiancé's news network, much like the inter-school Quidditch tournament." Maverick nodded after a moment. "I'll ask Bella and my friend Ali to get in touch." By now, he didn't need to involve himself personally in matters like this, and Isabella and Ali were more than capable of handling it on their own. Anyway, he would be too busy, because during this very tournament was also when his plan to topple the Secrecy Act would begin. And now, because of the changes that would be made to the Triwizard Tournament, some adjustments would also be needed in his plan, though nothing troublesome that couldn't be improvised. Some more words were exchanged, and soon, Maverick finally left for his chamber in the castle. Later, around sunset, the train would arrive at Hogwarts, packed full of students, ready to begin another, undoubtedly memorable semester. Chapter 253. A New Semester in Motion, II, ch. 273. Sunday evening, at 5 o'clock, the sky was already pitch black, and snow drizzled softly, blanketing the rooftops of the castle's many towers. Emerging from his office, Maverick strolled through the empty hallways and came to a stop by one of the open corridors. In the distance, he could see young witches and wizards returning from the holidays, appearing along the long slope that led to the castle. Excitement, and most of all eagerness, was written all across their faces. Even without using his magical sense to listen in, he could easily guess the subject of their animated conversations, which was quite literally about him, along with the three who had taken part in the battle against the aliens. Sighing, he continued his lazy walk toward the great hall for the opening dinner. For the next few days at least, he was certain he would have a hard time doing any actual teaching, with all the questions he would inevitably have to answer. The weeks passed like a quiet river, unhurried yet inevitable, carrying all things forward. The first week, true to his guess, half the lessons were about satisfying the young witches' and wizards' relentless curiosity, so much so that in the end, he had to gather the entire school on the weekend and play out the battle for everyone, of course, on the condition that no more talk of it should be held, at least during classes. It didn't work. The excitement continued through the second week and even lingered into the third, though it had begun to soften somewhat by then. It was only in the fourth week that life at Hogwarts finally returned to normal, with classes, meals, and lessons resuming their familiar rhythm for students and professors alike. And by familiar, it was not by typical Hogwarts standards, but by those of any normal educational institution. Hogwarts, after all, had always been a magnet for chaos. Yet now, with the matters of Peter Pettigrew and Sirius Black finally laid to rest, and even Lupin's furry problem resolved, the castle stood quieter than it had in years. The events that were meant to unfold in the original story would not come to pass. Probably, anyway. The trio's training also resumed in the room of requirement, and they seemed even more fired up now, for no other reason than having witnessed the thrilling battle against the alien invaders. After all, who wouldn't dream of being the hero who saves the world, right? In any case, there was one change in their practice routines now, which was that Jean had started joining them in the sessions as well. Initially, Maverick had been adamant that she experience life at Hogwarts normally, like any other student. But with the alien invasion and her Aunt Aurora being part of the team on the front lines, she seemed to have changed her mind as well, saying she wanted to be ready for anything. Of course, that wasn't the reason Maverick had agreed to let her join the trio in training, but it had been Aurora who, on the first day of school, gave him a call and asked him to allow her to participate, insisting on it quite persistently. Maverick had no doubt that the little witch was 100% behind it, making Aurora convince him and likely even feeding her what to say. Sly little bird. But anyway, she had already spent a semester like any other student, which was probably enough, and coupled with Aurora's personal insistence, he agreed in the end without much argument. Besides, it wouldn't be him personally instructing her, but the trio, who by now were more than capable of handling it, at least for the basics, until she could catch up with them. As for their performance, starting with the trio, Hermione and Ron were still behind Harry, and Potter, the son of luck, proved to be an absolute genius when it came to dueling, something Maverick had firmly recognized by now. A little slow, yes. Every time Harry learned new spells it took him some time, slower than Miss Know-It-All. But once he got the hang of them, applying them to practice came almost naturally to him. Their magical energy was also growing due to the high-intensity training they were undergoing. And Maverick was certain that by the time they graduated, at least Potter, Granger, and Jean would successfully advance from mage apprentice to magus. Jean, perhaps even sooner, for among all of them, her magic was the most potent, or more accurately, there shouldn't be anyone her age more magically gifted than her. Given, after all, she was an avatar of a walking, talking creature of cosmic myth. Fortunately, until now at least, there hadn't been any sign of her sleeping powers trying to take over. January, as well as February, passed just like that, with some frenzy at the beginning but eventually settling into a quiet rhythm. The harsh winter winds gradually softened, and the heavy snow gave way to occasional patches of sunlight breaking through gray skies, hinting at the coming spring. Then, once again in March, excitement returned to the school, stirring the corridors and classrooms with renewed energy. The second round of the inter-school Quidditch tournament began early in March, and once again, the team set off, flanked by Coach Stephen, McGonagall, and Hooch, bound for the host country. Maverick chose to stay behind for this round as well, though he planned to join them if the team made it to the finals. The castle buzzed with sportsmanship throughout the week. Huge screens were set up in the Great Hall, and even the house elves prepared feasts with extra treats for the occasion so that everyone could watch the games. Class schedules were adjusted as well, ensuring that whenever Hogwarts played, no student would miss a match, allowing everyone to gather and cheer together. This round featured 3 schools, each playing 2 games, making a total of 3 matches. In the past 2 years, thanks to a combination of luck and talent, Hogwarts had advanced through this round and even reached the finals, claiming the championship once. Unfortunately, this year was not their year. In the first game, they lost after a neck-and-neck battle against Igor Karkaroff's team of Durmstrang barbarians, falling short by just 2 goals when Durmstrang reached 150 points first. The second game was simply a matter of bad luck, as the opponent caught the snitch within the first 5 minutes, before Potter even had a chance to catch his breath. The son of luck had simply not been fortunate in either game. But that's the nature of Quidditch. Often, if luck is not on one side, the outcome can be harsh, and it can change in an instant. Unless the International Quidditch Association decides to change the strange rules surrounding the snitch, it will remain that way. Yet that unpredictability is also part of what sets Quidditch apart from Muggle sports. Magic and luck are inseparable, after all. This was also why Maverick chose not to propose changing the snitch rule in the tournament, limiting adjustments only to the total points instead. It was a miserable evening at Hogwarts. The whole school returned to their dormitories as if they had been taught a hard lesson, long faces everywhere. Still, no one blamed the team, as it was clear their loss in qualification had come down to bad luck. When the team returned, however, the school greeted them with as much fanfare as if they had won. Much of the credit went to old Dumbledore, who lifted everyone's spirits with his signature Dumbledore talk no jutsu, reminding them that both winning and losing are part of the beauty of the game. On the bright side, though, now that the school would no longer participate in the tournament for the rest of the year, the students of the all-star team got to play in the school's house competition. The teams were readjusted, and in the end, Quidditch frenzy continued with the same hype, if not more, than before. Weeks melted away, and suddenly, March was also behind, leaving only faint memories of its passing. The bitter winds of winter had softened, replaced by shafts of warm sunlight cutting through lingering clouds. Snow patches clung stubbornly to the grounds but were slowly retreating, revealing streaks of green that hinted at spring's quiet return. One weekend, after dinner and past curfew, Maverick wandered the empty corridors and once again, for the umpteenth time this semester, found himself standing before the gargoyle statues guarding the entrance to the headmaster's office. It wasn't a random stroll, though, and before he could even mutter the silly name of a dessert he would rather feed to Goose, the statues stepped aside, granting him permission to enter. From inside, the old wizard greeted him with his signature twinkle, but tonight his expression carried something more, a sense of anticipation and eagerness for what was to come. "I must say, Professor, I did not anticipate you finding it so quickly," Dumbledore said, his voice carrying both surprise and delight. "I reached out to every friend I could think of, and not one was in possession of it. I had begun to fear we might have reached a rather unfortunate dead end." Shrugging lightly, Maverick raised his hand and a small wooden box materialized in his palm. He extended it toward Dumbledore. "You might want to thank the Sorcerer Supreme," he said with a small smile. "After this is over, it would be wise to pay her a visit." Dumbledore only raised a brow, his knowing look giving nothing away, and nodded before carefully opening the box. After a beat, he closed it again, and in the next moment, the box vanished into his own storage ring. "I shall pay her a visit," he said softly, then turned toward the fireplace. "Come along, everything else is prepared for the last ritual." Chapter 254, Rites of Liberation, ch. 274. Hogwarts deep beneath the castle, in the Chamber of Secrets. The air was cool and heavy with the scent of wet stone, while the dim light from burning torches flickered across the walls, revealing serpentine carvings that glistened faintly with moisture. At the far end of the chamber stood a colossal stone face, presumably that of Salazar Slytherin himself. The carving was disturbingly lifelike, its expression both proud and cruel, with serpents twining around its long beard. Hideous would be the first word to come to mind when looking at it. Then, with a deep rumble, the statue began to move. Stone grated against stone as its mouth slowly opened, the lips parting and the massive jaw lowering to reveal a dark passage beyond, as though the ancient founder were about to speak after centuries of silence. From within the shadowed tunnel, slow, deliberate footsteps echoed into the vast underground hall, breaking the stillness as two figures emerged side by side. Their voices were low, almost casual, as they walked between the rows of serpent statues, the sound of their conversation mingling with the faint hiss of air moving through the ancient chamber. "Couldn't you have chosen a better place, Headmaster?" Maverick asked, waving his hand and sending two orbs of light drifting into the air. They hovered above, casting a steady glow across the damp stone. At least somewhere with a bit of a breeze. The two in question were Maverick and Dumbledore, and the passage they had just emerged from was none other than the true Chamber of Secrets, hidden behind the enormous stone face. After their first exploration of the place and their encounter with the castle's guardian, they were now able to access this secret sanctuary through a flue point connected to the headmaster's office, allowing them to enter and exit with ease whenever needed. "The ambient magic here is strong, and the chamber is well protected with wards," Dumbledore replied, half smiling, and paused as he reached the heart of the long walkway lined with countless grim snake faces, his steps coming to a deliberate halt. "Interesting choice for ink," Maverick said, frowning slightly. Before them, on the slick stone floor, a wide circle of rune-like patterns sprawled outward, drawn in a thick black substance. It glistened faintly in the torchlight, viscous and almost alive, as if the ink itself pulsed with a quiet, steady rhythm. "Ah, night serpent essence. I happened to acquire it from Hagrid," Dumbledore said, smiling. "It is rare, certainly, yet not altogether difficult to obtain. It resonates most harmoniously with darker forms of magic and provides a remarkably steady conduit for even the most intricate of runic enchantments. Or, in this particular case, for inscribing a ritual circle," Maverick added. "Quite right," Dumbledore agreed, his eyes twinkling as he gestured toward the slick black runes already laid out on the floor. "I completed the inscriptions only yesterday, and now it is ready to be set into motion." "Whenever you're prepared, Headmaster." "I shall begin then," Dumbledore said, nodding thoughtfully. While Maverick watched, Dumbledore stepped carefully into the circle, mindful not to disturb the dark ink, and one by one retrieved items from his storage ring, placing them at precise points along the patterns. "And you're certain, Headmaster, this is the last ritual?" Maverick asked after a moment, his eyes studying the objects carefully laid out within the circle. "The third," Dumbledore nodded thoughtfully as he continued his movements. "If all proceeds as it should, then yes, this will be the final ritual." Maverick then began to circle the drawn pattern, studying it carefully with both his eyes and his magical sense. "How far has the curse been lifted so far?" he asked. "It is not removed, Professor, though suppressed would be a more accurate term," Dumbledore answered, casting a brief glance at him, then retrieved another item, the wooden box Maverick had given him earlier, and continued his careful work. With a precise flick of his wand, he levitated it to the very center of the circle and gently lowered it into place. The item looked ordinary at first, just a small, withered piece of wood. Yet its deep black color and the deliberate care with which Dumbledore handled it made it clear there was more to it than met the eye. "Shadowroot," Dumbledore said, stepping carefully out of the circle now that the final item was in place. "Records tell us it is a subterranean tree, flourishing only in perpetual darkness. I must admit, I had long since lost hope, for it was believed extinct for centuries." He smiled, eyes twinkling as he gave Maverick a knowing glance. "That is, until you were kind enough to procure it for me." Saying, he walked over to Maverick and, standing shoulder to shoulder, peered into the circle. Then, with a teasing lilt in his voice, he asked, curious why it's so crucial. "I'm not," Maverick answered, letting out a quiet sigh at the old man's antics. "But I'm sure you'll explain anyway." Chuckling softly, Dumbledore continued. "It anchors the ritual to the physical world, preventing the curse from escaping into the ether or rebounding onto another host." He then pointed to another item. "The crystalline water from the silver springs cleanses magical residue, ensuring no remnants of the curse linger to rebind the victim later." Then he gestured to another. "Moonflower pollen enhances the alignment between earthly and cosmic energies needed to purge soul-bound curses. Dragon's vein blood acts as a stabilizer for volatile energies, preventing the curse from backfiring onto the caster or the circle. Its elemental power strengthens the ritual's containment." "I know the ingredients, Headmaster. I'm a master alchemist." Maverick cut him off, holding back the urge to roll his eyes. "By the way, where's Slytheris?" "Ah, the Guardian should be resting in her chambers." Dumbledore's hand moved to his chin. "But with you here, Professor, I won't be requiring her assistance during this ritual." "You had her assist you with the past rituals. How?" Maverick raised a brow, genuinely curious. "Of course. Using her authority over the castle's magic, she assisted in strengthening the wards of the chamber, even layering barriers with her own magical energy in case any residual magic was produced." Maverick gave the old man a long glance, then turned away. "I never took you for reckless or daring, Headmaster. Why didn't you ask for mine or Professor McGonagall's assistance?" "Oh, do not take it the wrong way, Professor. I acted as I did because I have every confidence the ritual would succeed completely. It was simply an exercise in extreme precaution." "And now, you don't have full confidence." "I do," the old wizard replied, eyes twinkling. "The ritual will succeed, of that I have no doubt. In my younger days, I pursued this branch of magic rather extensively and became, dare I say, fairly knowledgeable in it. Along with my—" He stopped mid-sentence, a faint smile tugging at his lips, as if reconsidering whether to share what was on his mind. "The point, Professor," he continued after a brief pause, "is that this old man knows what he is doing. And besides, the Ancestors' book is quite comprehensive. I dare say a master alchemist such as yourself could glean many valuable insights from it. Would you care to take a look for yourself?" "Isn't it in Slytherin's personal chamber?" Maverick shrugged knowingly. "So I will, eventually, when I have the time." "Grimoire of Eternal Chains," Dumbledore went on, eyes twinkling. "It contains some very wicked knowledge for anyone inclined toward evil, yet at the same time it is remarkably insightful." "I'm sure it is." Maverick had gone through nearly all the books in the General Chamber of Secrets by now. Only the personal collections in the Founder's private chambers remained largely unexplored. And these past few months, he had been pressed for time at every turn. Pushing the thought aside, he refocused on the matter at hand. "Is everything set up now for the ritual?" "Yes, though I will need your assistance, Professor, to ensure the aftermath is as quiet and controlled as possible." Maverick took a moment to consider, then gave a small nod. After all, this was a ritual, a branch of magic he was not particularly proficient in. Yet he trusted Dumbledore, and from the old man's calm explanations, he sensed nothing but confidence. And with that reassurance, he let go of any lingering worry as well that something might go awry. Once again, Dumbledore carefully stepped inside the circle, and while standing at the only point empty of ink and objects, he waved his wand. As a result, his robes vanished along with every piece of fabric on his upper body, and the old man lowered himself to the stone floor. "Damn, this old thing is ripped off." Maverick raised an eyebrow, watching Dumbledore's deliberate movements, then moved into action himself, pushing up from the stone floor and letting his magic flow as well, weaving protective layers around the ritual circle. Layer by layer, he applied magical barriers, combining the magical system and the spells of sorcery. And soon, despite not being able to see anything with the naked eye, he was sure nothing, physical or otherwise, could escape far from the runic circle in which Dumbledore sat. Meanwhile, sitting cross-legged with his upper body bare, Dumbledore waved the Elder Wand with his good hand, tracing precise gestures over his other, cursed hand. The tattered fabric that had once covered it had vanished, leaving only skin exposed. At a glance, the change was striking. Where before the hand had looked sickly and bluish, it now appeared almost normal, at least to the naked eye. The last two rituals the old man had performed seemed to have worked their miracle. From what Maverick had learned from Dumbledore, the curse was now almost completely suppressed. What remained, then, was simply the final step, removing it entirely and destroying it. With another flick of the Elder Wand, one of the ingredients, the crystalline water that Maverick recognized by its silvery hue and faint magical residue, began to flow from its container in the ritual circle. Gradually, it flowed outward and wrapped around Dumbledore's outstretched, cursed hand like a serpent encircling its prey. "When you're ready, Professor, I shall begin." With his arm, from elbow completely enveloped in the water containing the special magical essence, Dumbledore called out without raising his head. "One moment," Maverick said, then added one final layer of magic. He enclosed the space and manipulated the mirror dimension, not in the usual way, but altered it so that objects could enter the circle while nothing could escape. To an outside observer, shards of mirror-like surfaces would appear out of thin air, slowly spreading to envelop the entire space. Gradually, Dumbledore and Maverick would fade from sight, vanishing from the naked eye as if the air itself had swallowed them. "Interesting, what fascinating magic," Dumbledore couldn't help but remark mid-action. "You can start now, Headmaster." Chapter 255, Rites of Liberation, II, ch. 275. Dip. 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 Hogwarts, deep underground, within the outer hall of the Slytherin Chamber of Secrets. The soft sound of water droplets falling into a small puddle echoed through the still air, each drop rebounding off the stone walls like a slow, unending rhythm. The chamber was silent otherwise, almost eerie. The air was heavy with the scent of wet stone, and a chill dampness seemed to seep into the skin, while dim light from a line of torches flickered faintly across the damp stone statues, where patches of moss and mold clung stubbornly to their surfaces. To any outside observer, it would seem like an ancient ruin, lifeless and undisturbed. Yet in truth, behind the veil of reality, existing both there and not truly there at the same time, a great struggle of will and rare magic was taking place. Within the mirrored dimension, magic unlike any found in spellbooks stirred the air. Light and shadow intertwined, clashing in a silent battle over a single soul. Bolts of mysterious purple energy leaked from the runic symbols forming the ritual circle, and at its center, Dumbledore's bare upper body glistened faintly. The symbols pulsed with a steady rhythm, each thrum echoing the quiet beat of his heart. The water around his outstretched hand rippled with energy, revealing faint black veins pulsing beneath his skin as if alive. Gradually, the parasitic curse attached to his soul began to yield to the ritual's force, pushed outward as tendrils of shadow-like smoke leaked into the air. It was a slow process, but it was working. Rhythmic surges of magic coursed through the mirrored dimension, each pulse echoing like a heartbeat in the void, while bolts of blackish lightning continued to arc from the runes, drawing power from the rare and magical materials placed within the inscriptions. The ritual was clearly working its miracle. Yet Dumbledore, at least from his outward expression, showed no sign of discomfort. All the while, purple light flickered across the old wizard's face, catching on his composed features and the sharp focus in his eyes as time moved on. Maverick, watching from above, sensed everything as he observed this mysterious branch of magic at work. It was fascinating to him. After all, this was the first time witnessing a magical ritual unfold. But at some point, his brows furrowed, and curiosity turned into caution. There was something there he could not quite identify at first, though not entirely unfamiliar. A few years ago, he remembered feeling the same cold and repulsive energy during his battle against Morvain, after the lunatic had made some sort of contract with a mysterious entity. At the time, being new to the world of magic, he had no idea what it was. Later, however, he learned it was demonology, and the energy he was sensing now carried the same dark, familiar presence. On second thought, it wasn't surprising at all that Riddle dabbled in such vile magic. Like Morvain, he was also hopelessly lost to his own insanity, probably the maddest of them all. Demonology, after all, is not something one simply studies, waves a wand, and masters overnight. It demands a price of its own, a contract, or in other words, an equivalent exchange. A soul, a life, even one's sanity could be placed on the table for the bargain, quite literally a deal with the devil, all for power beyond mortal measure. Riddle must have given up something of great importance to bind that curse to the ring. Knowing him, it could have been a fragment of his own soul or worse, the lives of countless innocents. Whatever it was, it could not have been insignificant, or Dumbledore would have found a cure long before now, with all his wisdom and connections. It was only after discovering the Chamber of Secrets and its collection of precious books that the old man finally found a way out. The old wizard had kept it to himself about that, but Maverick had known for some time now. Such a thing as the lingering aura of decay and death could not escape his keen magical senses, given how often he met the old man at Hogwarts. However, he chose not to mention it, preferring to wait until Dumbledore brought it up himself. Perhaps he was waiting for the right time, but anyway, he knew about it, and Maverick was certain that Dumbledore also knew he knew. Besides, during the alien invasion, Grandmaster Flammel had even remarked about it in front of everyone. And just weeks earlier, Dumbledore had asked for Maverick's help in locating a crucial ingredient for a special ritual, or so he had said. It was also then that the old wizard finally shared everything with him. Beyond that, Dumbledore also recounted some of his past attempts to find a cure, even revealing that he had sought the Sorcerer Supreme's assistance. At first, Maverick was a little taken aback upon hearing that the Sorcerer Supreme herself was unable to offer any assistance, and he even inwardly raised the threat level of old Valdi by a couple of notches. After all, if Riddle was able to cast curses that even the Sorcerer Supreme had no solution for, then that meant the man was truly a monster. Locating the ingredient Dumbledore had asked for proved tricky at first, since it had apparently been considered long extinct for many centuries. He tried using the connections he had, but had no luck. Finally, he thought to turn to the sorcerer's side. After all, the Sorcerer Supreme herself had said he could come to her anytime, and if anyone could track down something thought extinct, it would be her. At the same time, he also wanted to verify whether Dumbledore's claims were true, or if there was another piece of the story he hadn't been told. It turned out there was. First, he got the item Dumbledore wanted in almost no time. The Sorcerer Supreme had simply opened a portal, disappeared to who knows where, and returned moments later, as if she had just stepped out for a quick errand, casually handing him the ingredient. A bit anticlimactic, really. She didn't even ask for any favor in return. And it wasn't a small piece she gave him, but anyway, he had more than enough, with even more left over for who knows when it might be needed in the future. And with that taken care of, he finally asked her about the curse leeching on Dumbledore. Once again, he was left uncertain, for the Sorcerer Supreme only gave a knowing smile. Ridding Dumbledore of the curse would have been simple, she said casually. I could have fixed him in no time. The next question, of course, was why she didn't. To answer that, the woman gave him a strange look and an even stranger curl of her smile before saying, "Aren't you helping Dumbledore save his life now?" In other words, she could have saved him, but apparently she wanted him to be involved, which, as it happened, he now was. Did she see the future back then and decide not to help Dumbledore herself? Or was it a future even further ahead, beyond now, that showed her something which influenced her decision? Or perhaps she saw that helping him would alter both his and Dumbledore's future too much. In any case, he didn't know, and frankly, there was no point in racking his brain over it. He didn't ask any more questions. He simply thanked her for her help with the item and left on the spot. Nearly half an hour had passed. The magical fluctuations radiating from the ritual had reached their peak, though they were still nothing Maverick couldn't contain. He could feel the ritual nearing its climax. The dark veins on Dumbledore's hand had nearly vanished, evaporated into smoke. Again, a bit anticlimactic, honestly. Even Riddle's Horcrux, when it was consumed by fiendfire, had at least let out a wail. The old man also did not appear to have experienced any pain from the beginning until now, maintaining the same solemn and focused expression. Perhaps he was suppressing any discomfort, or maybe the ritual itself was simply that powerful and efficient. Maverick made a mental note that he definitely needed to read the book Dumbledore had mentioned. A few minutes later, Maverick heard Dumbledore utter a single, strange syllable, sharp and resonant, and subsequently, the water around his hand exploded into motes of golden light before vanishing entirely. The glow from the circle also faded, as if the runes themselves had exhausted their power, until finally, only the faint torchlight remained. Silence fell once more, and sensing no lingering magic in the air, Maverick lowered himself to the ground as well, waving his hand while also dispelling the mirror dimension. Dumbledore exhaled deeply and lowered his hand. The hand that had once borne the curse looked whole again, the skin smooth, pale, and unmarked. He flexed his fingers once, and perhaps involuntary, a smile curled his lips, his eyes calm and faintly amused. "Congratulations." "Thank you," Dumbledore replied with a smile, rising to his feet. His robes materialized, and with a few flicks of the Elder Wand, the signs of the inscribed circle, along with the remains of the materials, vanished all in a single breath. "How does your magic feel?" "Good," he nodded. "Better than good, in fact." He tightened his grip on the Elder Wand and raised his arm with quiet confidence. "I can no longer sense even the faintest echo of the curse." Then, closing his eyes, he drew in a slow breath and released it just as calmly. "It has been far too long since I have felt this, unburdened." Opening his eyes again, he turned to Maverick, smiling with undisguised appreciation. "You have my deepest gratitude, Maverick. Without your help, I fear this old man would still be quietly counting his remaining days." "I barely did anything." "No, the Chamber of Secrets, the library, all of it. Without your hand in fate, I might never have found my way to it." Okay. Maverick waved his hand quickly, cutting him off. "I get it, so please spare me." He really didn't want to have this conversation. It was awkward as hell. Chuckling, Dumbledore nodded and let the matter rest. They were familiar enough by now that not everything needed to be spoken aloud. Besides, this wasn't the only favor Dumbledore owed him. "I'll conduct a diagnosis as well, so lower your magical defenses for a moment." Dumbledore nodded. He had already done one himself, but more eyes were indeed always better. And he trusted Maverick completely, so he complied without a thought, drawing back his magic, both the passive and active layers guarding his body and soul. Minutes passed before the orange sparks coursing along Dumbledore finally disappeared. The diagnosis spells, both from the magical system and the sorcery, had done their task. From what Maverick could tell, the ritual had been thoroughly successful, perhaps a little too successful, as he was momentarily taken aback by the feedback he received. First, nothing remained of the evil curse, no lingering traces, no injuries to the body, and even his soul appeared unharmed. But how? Dumbledore should have borne some damage to his soul, having had the curse drain his life energy all these years, shouldn't he? Even if the curse had been removed, the injury should still have remained. It should have taken time to recover. The spell he had used to examine Dumbledore's magic was highly advanced sorcery, at least in the field of diagnosis and detection. It was capable of revealing even subtle abnormalities in a person's life energy, possession, leeching, missing fragments, but he detected nothing of the sort. In other words, Dumbledore's life energy seemed completely unharmed. Therefore, the only reasonable conclusion was that the ritual had not only cured him entirely, but had also restored the life energy the curse had drained. Incredible, he thought. "Headmaster, you're completely recovered." Lowering his arm and wearing a thoughtful expression, he finally spoke. "Physically and magically, you're fine." Dumbledore let out a soft chuckle. "Ah, from that look on your face, I see you have questions," he said, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. "Let me venture a guess. You're wondering how my injuries healed so completely." "Yes," Maverick admitted plainly. "Understandable," Dumbledore said, inclining his head. "Ritual magic is a subtle and demanding art, studied by very few." Well, the old wizard wasn't wrong. It wasn't a popular subject of study, not even publicly taught. The main reason was that much of it involved steps far darker than most would dare to attempt. 9 times out of 10, the process required binding, manipulating, or sometimes even consuming something vulgar, flesh, blood, or the like. Essentially, rituals tampered with the natural order of things, carried immense risk, and could even inflict lasting damage on one's own soul. Of course, high risk often meant high reward, but not everyone was willing to pay such a price. There was perhaps only one magic of that sort taught publicly throughout the magical world, and that was the animagus ritual. But even that was taught under extreme supervision, because if the ritual went wrong, the witch or wizard could very well become permanently trapped in the form of the animal, their mind and soul warped beyond repair. Come, Dumbledore beckoned Maverick to follow. Let us continue this conversation in the Ancestors' Library. Chapter 256, Rites of Liberation, ch-276. Slytherin's Chamber of Secrets was, in truth, more of a library than anything else. Books, books, and more books. In fact, it could hardly even be called Slytherin's Chamber, for the volumes stored here belonged to all four of the great warlocks. Each founder had a personal chamber of their own, preserving the magical knowledge they had gathered through their lives. The only thing that truly marked this secret chamber, as Slytherin's, was perhaps the enormous serpent that was the basilisk, and the damp, gloomy atmosphere that seemed to fit the man's reputation perfectly. Otherwise, it might as well have been called the Hogwarts chamber of exceptionally rare books, guarded, of course, by an equally exceptional snake. Back to the matter at hand, Slytherin's private chamber was small and austere, much like the others, with only subtle differences in detail and perhaps in color. Its stone walls were lined with shelves packed to the brim with time-worn books. To one side stood a wooden table of dark, polished oak, its surface worn smooth by time, with a half-melted candle burning quietly upon it, the flickering flame sending restless shadows dancing over the shelves and steeping the chamber in a solemn, reverent stillness. Well, that was the case a few hours ago. The chamber was now otherwise occupied by two men, one old and one young. This is really? Commenting on what he had just read while closing an ancient-looking book, Maverick glanced at Dumbledore, who sat across from him, smiling knowingly as if expecting his reaction. Profound knowledge, headmaster. Profound, yes, Dumbledore nodded. And dangerous. Magic that deals directly with the soul can be perilous if wielded by the wrong hands, of course. Yeah, no kidding, Maverick mused. The text covered everything from the creation of Horcruxes to the merging of shattered souls, written in such precise, almost scholarly detail that any ordinary witch or wizard would have deemed it forbidden magic on sight. And that was only scratching the surface of the bizarre and unsettling knowledge within. Moreover, that was only one book. This was Salazar Slytherin's personal library, filled with all kinds of knowledge most would rather burn than read. No wonder the man had such dark rumors around his name. In Muggle terms, he was exactly what they'd call a mad scientist. There were even books here dissecting the 3 unforgivable curses, covering both attack and defense, and even Maverick had found new insights within them. It was worth noting that his understanding of the 3 unforgivables was already at an advanced level, meaning the system had instilled in him profound comprehension that one might not find in any book. In other words, as Dumbledore had said, the knowledge contained in this library could indeed be very dangerous in the wrong hands. Fortunately, old Valdi never discovered this true chamber within the Chamber of Secrets during his school days, or Maverick was certain the mad fool would have tried every ritual in these books that promised even the faintest taste of power. Is it the ritual of anima purificae that you performed today? Putting the book down on the table and sliding it across, he asked after a moment of thought. Indeed, Dumbledore waved his hand, and the book levitated, drifting to one of the shelves where it settled neatly into place. That, and the rituals of maledicta vinculum and tenebris compressum. It had to be said, this old man was truly a genius. In fact, the rituals Dumbledore had performed weren't even designed for removing a curse of demonic corruption. None of them were. It was the wise old man's ingenuity to use them in a precise order that had, in the end, cured him completely, and perhaps even improved him. Wait a minute, headmaster. Maverick suddenly thought of something, and his eyes lit up. Do you think that the same series of rituals could be used on Potter, to rid him of the parasite of Riddle's soul? At his words, Dumbledore raised a brow, then fell into thought, leaning back in his chair. He rubbed his chin, mulling over the idea, while Maverick waited. After a while, his eyes seemed to gleam as he looked at Maverick. Theoretically, yes. Please explain, headmaster. I'm not that knowledgeable in this particular branch of magic, you know. It's actually very simple. Dumbledore leaned forward. Young Harry, what do you think is the difference between the entity leeching his magic and the curse that parasitized my soul? Horcrux, Maverick answered with a thoughtful expression, then his eyes lit up. Soul, it's the soul. Brilliant, Dumbledore chuckled lightly. How I wish you were a student here at Hogwarts, Professor. Right, I've heard that too many times. Maverick waved a hand dismissively. Chuckling again, Dumbledore continued. What's parasitizing young Harry is a fragment of a mortal soul, while in my case, it was something else. He raised one finger, as if lecturing a student. Similar in some ways, but also different. What do you think would happen if the ritual were done on young Harry? Honestly, Maverick had no idea, and he didn't try to act smart. I don't know. Precisely, said Dumbledore, leaning back again. We don't know, but that doesn't mean it's the end of the matter. Your suggestion, in fact, is theoretically quite sound. I shall research further to see if it can be made foolproof. Maverick nodded. Unless absolutely certain, he would not attempt it either. It could cure Harry and remove the parasitic fragment, but it could just as easily make things worse. Better to wait. Moreover, Harry wasn't Dumbledore, and his composure and magical stability would be vastly different, factors that could affect the ritual's outcome. Please do, Headmaster, Maverick said solemnly. If Harry could rid himself of the parasitic soul before next year, then Maverick's plans would become far more foolproof. A lot of uncertainties could be removed, or in other words, many risks cast aside. If there's anything you need, rare ingredients, components, anything you can't find, let me know. I really want the kid to get better. Leaning back in his chair, smiling with that familiar twinkle in his eyes, and giving a look Maverick couldn't quite read, Dumbledore nodded. I shall do it regardless, Professor. Young Harry's unfortunate situation, he sighed melancholically, and his family's tragedy back then are also partly my fault. I trusted the wrong people, or perhaps I was too overconfident. Either way, it is my responsibility. Looking at the old man's expression, Maverick could tell he truly meant it. He wasn't a schemer, well, maybe an old one, but he was definitely not the manipulative villain so many fanfictions in his past life had painted him to be. Knowing him this long, Maverick could at least deduce that much. Right then, let's put this matter aside for now. You can rest assured I will devote my utmost effort to researching the ritual. Dumbledore rose to his feet after a moment of silence. Let us head back up for now. Maverick nodded and stood as well. Will you be announcing your recovery to the world? Walking side by side out of the chamber, Dumbledore shook his head. Not yet. I would appreciate it if you too, Professor, kept the matter between us for now. Saying that, he raised his hand, and the tattered clothing that had once been draped over his arms materialized again beneath his sleeve. What's this old man thinking now? Maverick thought, but he didn't dwell on it and simply shrugged. Whatever. It's your call, Headmaster, he said. A few days later, the Muggle science classroom. Inside, the air smelled faintly of metal and charred dust. Heavy oak tables stood in neat rows, 2 students sharing one, each equipped with simple glass beakers, small metal rods, and tiny open boxes filled with powders and crystals. Today's lesson focused on decomposition. Maverick rolled up his sleeves and scanned the classroom, watching the students dive into the work before them. Behind him, a single word was underlined twice in chalk: electrolysis. As with physics and biology, chemistry, of course, had its place in the Muggle science curriculum. And what better way to show just how fascinating it could be than with a simple electrolysis experiment, right? Moreover, it was one of his favorite subjects, and he had loved it even in his previous life. Macmillan, it's supposed to be pale yellow, not that murky green. He paused beside their table as he walked past. And Parkinson, no magic, use the tools provided. Look carefully, green means too much salt. Clean the rod, correct it, and keep going. Moving on, he noticed the only redhead in the class looking up at him and came to a stop. Okay, Ronald, what's bothering you? Professor, Ron cleared his throat, stealing a look at his partner before speaking. I mean, is it really possible to, make proper gold this way? Clearly, some odd ideas had gone on between the two of them. Maverick stared blankly for a moment, then looked at the beaker they were working on. What you're doing here, as I mentioned in the beginning, is coding, not creating. You're depositing gold ions from the solution onto the rod. Basically, just painting, so don't go having weird ideas. Ron sighed and nodded, returning to his work. His partner for today's class was Susan Bones, a meticulous little witch. Their experiment, at least, showed no signs of error despite the odd question Ron had just asked, so Maverick didn't linger and moved on to the next table. A few tables down, another hand raised. Maverick approached Draco Malfoy and Hannah Abbott, who were frowning at their beaker. "Professor, why is ours all brown?" Maverick leaned in to inspect. "I told you to clean the rod properly before starting. Otherwise, the residue on the surface reacts first, ruining the finish, which is exactly what's happened here. Off the fumes, clean it properly, then try again." He continued moving through the classroom, the flicker of each table's flame reflecting in his eyes. Beakers clinked softly, and the faint metallic scent filled the air as students watched the slow shimmer spread along their rods. "Patience," he said as he passed Harry and Tracy. "Real science is slower than magic, but sometimes that's the beauty of it. The process itself teaches you something." Minutes passed, accompanied by the soft murmur of discussion and the occasional whispered question, until the bell finally rang, marking the end of the allotted class period. "All right," Maverick called, clapping his hands once. "That's enough for today. Switch off your power sources and set your rods aside. Now, before you all pull out your wands, don't." Groans rippled across the room, as if they had already expected him to say it. Smiling faintly without changing his expression, Maverick continued. "Remember, this is Muggle chemistry, not a potions classroom. For learning's sake, you'll clean the instruments the Muggle way too. Soap, water, and absolutely no spells." It was the last class of the day, and the students had no other lessons to attend anyway. And with that, he turned toward the door, leaving them with the final instruction. As soon as he stepped outside, a subtle thrill passed over his face, though it wasn't because he had just taught another interesting lesson about science to his students. During class a while back, he had finally received the message he had been most expecting this month, and he could hardly wait to leave the school. But first, he needed to let the old man know he wouldn't be around. He raised his hand and flicked his finger, and a silver-white shimmer gathered at his fingertips, taking the form of a raven whose feathers seemed woven from living mist. "Go," he whispered, watching the silver raven cry once and vanish through the wall, and with a single thought, his own figure also dissolved into invisibility as he moved toward the nearest open window. Chapter 257, Into the Red Eye, ch. 277. "It's not the deep red I was expecting. It's more like a muted orange red or butterscotch. What made you think it would be straight red?" "I mean, people keep calling it that. Whatever, forget it. Is the centermost feed running in real time? London, deep underground at the Mars Mission Lab, or the headquarters, or simply Mission Control?" Maverick never really bothers naming his underground bases. He just calls them this or that location. The atmosphere here was especially lively today. People in white coats moved between stations with quick steps and hushed voices, their eyes flicking from papers to glowing screens. One wall held a wide monitor that covered nearly the entire surface, divided into several live feeds, each one showing a different angle in and from the space pod as it drifted into the red planet's orbital region. Beneath it, a long row of control units hummed with steady lights and flickering buttons, while other consoles filled the room in neat clusters, each one manned by someone adjusting dials or tapping keys as telemetry streamed in. The control room itself was built on a single wide floor, and a short metal staircase on both sides led up to a raised platform that felt almost like a stage created for oversight. From there, anyone standing at the railing could see the entire room and every feed running at once. At this moment, Maverick, Norex, Bucky, Howard, and his wife stood among several other scientists and alchemists, some watching in silence and others commenting softly as the controlled chaos unfolded below them. The reason for everyone gathering here was obvious. Today, if everything went according to plan, could become the day their long quest reached its turning point, the day they finally surfaced the mysterious world. "Yes, the camera with the quantum entanglement tech we installed last week on the spaceship has its feed up on the center screen," Howard said, nodding without taking his eyes off the display. "The rest of the feeds are running about 10 minutes behind. Mars isn't exactly close to Earth right now, but it isn't at its farthest either, Norex chimed in. Using standard Earth technology, the delay would be anywhere from 4 to 20 minutes, depending on the planet's positions. Quantum entanglement research is our main focus at the moment, sir, another man in a lab coat said. It will give us reliable, near-instant communication and allow us to track the mission in real time. Over the long term, it should save a significant amount of time. I don't mind, Maverick nodded without looking. Just don't put the entire team on a single project. If you need extra manpower for it, let me know. It won't take long, Howard said. With Norex on board, we should have this technology under control in no time. He glanced briefly at Maverick and added, I can't help but wonder if the world is ready for this technology. No, Maverick interjected firmly. Not yet. It's far too soon to share such groundbreaking technology with the world. They're barely entering the age of information technology. His expression turned thoughtful. In 10 years, maybe 20, then I won't mind. Until then, any technology we study from the Kree and Norex stays with us. Earth's communication tech, or data transmission, basically runs at the speed of light. That's not slow by any means within the planet, but beyond it, when distances stretch from tens of thousands of kilometers to millions or even billions, the delays start adding up fast. Even a message between the Moon and Earth isn't instantaneous, let alone one traveling to a whole other planet. Quantum entanglement, on the other hand, lets information jump instantly across any distance. If the latest Earth tech was like sending a letter through the mail, entanglement was like whispering into someone's ear on the other side of the solar system, and they would hear it the instant you spoke. Of course, quantum entanglement technology is not just for faster communication. The reason Maverick was not willing to share it, at least not right now, was simply because most of the leadership on the planet was stupid and short-sighted. He had no doubt that the first thing they would do is try to weaponize it, turning a scientific breakthrough into a tool for destruction. On top of that, the biggest reason was that sharing the technology now would completely alter the course of technological evolution across the entire world. It could accelerate progress by decades or even hundreds of years, and as a result, he would effectively lose the advantage of his future knowledge. Fine, you're the one paying the bills. The tech stays with us, Howard said, waving his hand. The people working here were carefully selected, including both muggles and magicals, and Maverick had, more or less, some trust that they would not be tempted to go against his instructions for greed or any other reason. And even if some idiot were to, say, plan to go against his orders, they could not. It was not just trust or a paper contract that gave him confidence, and he was not stupid enough to leave everything to just that either. For a mage of his caliber, he had more than enough ways to ensure their tongues stayed restrained. Call it cruel or tyranny, he did not care. They were not here by force, but of their own free will, having acknowledged the terms. On top of that, the benefits he offered were far better than anything they could find elsewhere. Not to mention, they were part of history, researching and participating in something as groundbreaking as literally reshaping the structure of a planet. Anyway, from that distance, are you able to do your thing? Howard asked again. How far away is it still? Howard, with a hand on his chin, made a thoughtful expression and hummed. Further than the distance, the ISS orbits Earth. Actually, it's about 3 times that distance, another scientist added. Then it should be fine, Maverick said, nodding, and then turned to Norex. Is the suit ready? Yes, I've modified the communication systems, upgraded the suit's durability, and added the settings you requested. It can handle any region of the red planet's surface, including its harshest weather conditions and the freezing poles. Good, a smile crossed Maverick's face. Then let's not waste time. A few minutes later, he stood inside a small, sealed room, wearing the gear Norex had made. The spacesuit was basically the Kree uniform with some upgrades, and of course, the look had been altered to better fit his particular tastes. Sleek, all black, and absolutely not a cape trailing behind him. It might look simple at first glance, but it held a ton of technology beneath the surface and could be used for multiple purposes, not just as a spacesuit. Close combat was entirely possible, and wearing it felt surprisingly comfortable. It was strong, equipped with a breathing system, a communication system, a holographic interface, and basically packed with advanced tech throughout. Room is sealed. You may open the portal, boss man, Howard's voice rang out inside the room. The purpose of the contained space is simple: safety. When the portal opens, it essentially connects the atmospheres of 2 planets, and hazardous gases containing who knows what from Mars would undoubtedly flow in. The control room's containment system prevents the rest of the lab from being flooded with all that nasty stuff until it is neutralized. First, though, he didn't open a portal directly to Mars. He couldn't, not yet. His hands moved, and the portal first connected to the inside of the spacecraft, and he stepped through. Once inside, the portal closed behind him, and he walked to the ship's front, finally seeing the red planet up close for the first time. It looked breathtaking, for lack of a better word, and he couldn't help but smile. Not because Mars was beautiful, its red dust and jagged terrain could never match Earth's blue and green, at least not yet. The smile came simply because this was the place. This was the moment where his plans and his ambition would truly begin. "This is Mission Control. Boss man, do you read?" Howard's voice echoed inside the suit's helmet. "I can. Is the body camera feed running okay?" "Clear as day," Howard answered. "I've sent the coordinates marking the best spot to surface," Norix's voice followed. "The pod is directly above the location, the Elysium Planitia region, as you humans named it. It is a flat surface surrounded by rocky mountains on all sides and is less likely to encounter severe weather. Yes, Mars does have storms, and that factor had to be considered before establishing a base. However, the storms on the red planet are very different from those on Earth. There is no rain or lightning, since the atmosphere is extremely thin and dry, but dust storms and dramatic temperature swings make the weather just as harsh and dangerous for both equipment and humans. 3 regions were shortlisted as good candidates for the starting base, and Maverick's team collectively voted for Elysium Planitia. It's a very flat region, statistically calmer than many equatorial locations. Basically, there's no place on Mars guaranteed to be storm-free. Global and regional dust storms can, at times, affect nearly the whole planet. That said, some areas have a much lower probability of dust storm activity, and this region was one of them. Hearing Howard and Norix's instructions, Maverick's eyes moved to the holographic display in front of his retina. A miniature map of the red planet appeared, with a blinking point indicating where he should go. Right then, the space pod will temporarily lose connection. "I'm preparing to surface," Maverick spoke into the communicator. Then, with a thought, he vanished from the spot and reappeared outside in space, beside the ship. The plan was never about piloting the thing through the red planet's atmosphere. That would be foolish when he had far better and more efficient means. So next, with a single, effortless motion, he made the not-so-large space pod vanish into his storage space. The space pod had basically achieved its purpose at this point. Perhaps far, far in the future, it would end up displayed in some museum, who knows. He then turned slowly, letting his gaze sweep across the red planet, taking in the vast, alien landscape that stretched endlessly before him. The convenient thing about the sling ring portal was that so long as he could see, had seen, or had been to a place, he could open a portal directly there regardless of distance. He had traveled back and forth between the space pod and Earth many times now, and until now, no problem had occurred. In the Avengers Endgame movie, he remembered Dr. Stephen Strange opening a portal all the way from Titan, Thanos' homeworld, which should be tens of thousands of light-years apart. He had even vaguely asked the Sorcerer Supreme about the range of the sling ring portal. Her answer was simply, so long as one knows and has been to a place, the portal can connect, even across dimensions. Basically, the sling ring portal was an absurdly powerful spell. Anyway, he would soon find out whether he could cross planets using the portal magic. With a thought, his body moved closer to the planet, the extraordinary flight magic, replicated from the super broom, guiding him forward. About a quarter of an hour later, he felt the planet's gravity beginning to pull him down, and he stopped. He glanced from the holographic instructions displayed in his retina back to the planet, fixed on one spot, and guided his hands with careful intention. The familiar orange portal materialized again, and he stepped through without a second thought. He emerged on the other side, hovering roughly 10,000 meters above the jagged red terrain. This was perhaps the first time in human history that someone from Earth had penetrated deep into the Martian atmosphere. Well, he pushed the thought aside. There was no one there to applaud anyway. Instead, he took a moment to digest the scene. The vast orange sky stretching endlessly above him, and the rocky surface below looking both alien and astonishing. A bit off course, Mr. Caesar. Please follow the coordinates. The pointer is showing over your eye. Instructions came through the communicator as he breathed in the alien air. Technically, he was wearing a helmet, but metaphorically, that was how it felt to him. Classical mechanics, boss man. Newton's laws of motion. I know the law of inertia, Howard. Shut up and let me focus, Maverick snapped, cutting the annoying bastard off. Sighing and brushing aside the feeling of taking in the moment, he focused between the instructions displayed on his retina and the planet's surface again. From where he hovered, he could already make out landmarks on the ground below. It was daytime in this region, but unlike Earth, the sky wasn't bright blue. The thin CO2 atmosphere and suspended iron-rich dust scattered sunlight differently. The overall effect was a muted, dusty hue, almost like a desert with a permanent haze. Moments later, he gestured with his hands once more, and the portal appeared, connecting to a region far away but still within his sight. Chapter 258, Into the Red Eye, CH 278. Thin sunlight drifted through a dusty pink sky, soft and distant as it met the cold, dry air. Faint winds moved across the ground in slow sweeps, lifting ribbons of red dust that twisted and settled with quiet ease. Everywhere in sight, the landscape looked washed out under the pale sun, and distant horizons blurred slightly in the ever-present haze. Crouching down, Maverick scooped up a handful of dry, orange sand, the grains tapping lightly against the reinforced gloves of his suit as he tested the texture. There wasn't anything remarkable about it. Through the layers of composite fabric, it felt like, well, sand. Letting the loose grit fall back to the ground, he pushed himself upright, his eyes sweeping over the endless expanse before him. The land stretched in muted silence, a vast plain of rocky terrain interrupted by shallow ridges and patches of cracked soil. Small stones littered the surface like shards of broken pottery, each coated in the familiar burnt orange hue. In the distance, rounded hills rose gently, sculpted by ancient winds rather than water, their forms glowing softly in shades of red. The silence was absolute. No birds chirped here, no leaves rustled, nothing stirred, save for the faint hiss of the thin wind sliding past him. See, sir. See, sir. Before his transmigration, he had seen Mars through NASA's rover footage, crisp and clear on a screen. The scenes were accurate, but a screen could never replicate the sensation of being here. The orange-red hue clung to every surface, as if the world itself wore a permanent filter. CASER. When he finally reached the coordinates blinking on his retina, he had first lingered, letting the full scope of the scene register in his head. Of course, he had seen many incredible, extraordinary things ever since his transmigration, but still, this was a moment to be remembered, and not exactly for the sight before him, but for the journey that had brought him here, which had spanned millions of miles and countless days. If only his communicator would stop buzzing and spared him a moment. He exhaled, the sound escaping like a small cloud inside his helmet. I can hear you, Howard. Why aren't you responding? Never mind that. How do you feel? Howard's voice poured through the comm in an unstoppable rush of questions. If anything, Howard, despite being all the way back on Earth, sounded far more excited than he felt. What could possibly be wrong with me? Maverick almost rolled his eyes before directing a question to the only alien on the other end of the line. Norex, is this the correct location for our first base? He stood at the spot, blinking on his helmet's display. The area around him was wide and flat enough, free of hills or mountains, and there were no signs of sandstorms anywhere in sight. Yes, based on the data, that is the best possible location for setting up a base, taking all variables into account. Good. Hearing the confirmation, Maverick nodded, a faint smile crossing his lips. Have everyone who wants to visit Mars today put on the gear and head to the containment room. Once they're ready, just let me know. The next thing he heard was a frenzy of excited voices, and he couldn't help shaking his head, letting out a chuckle. After all, what scientist on Earth, or rather, who on Earth, would not want to step onto another planet if given the chance? In any case, this was simply to give everyone a taste of standing on the red planet's surface, walking around a bit, and satisfying the curiosity of their inner child. While the others prepared themselves, Maverick continued his inspection. Rising above the ground once again, he flew higher, reaching about half a kilometer and pushed his magic to the limit, spreading his senses through a third eye to observe the region. Who knows, he might stumble onto something unexpected. Well, he didn't. Figures, sand, rocks, and more sand stretched for miles. On the bright side, though, he didn't notice anything unusual while channeling his magic. The ambient magic, it seems, is like a universal force, similar to cosmic energy that is present everywhere. It was a little thin, sure, but still there. That means factors such as the presence of life or anything similar do not determine whether magic exists or can be channeled. Well, that's still a hypothesis, something for the alchemists to research while they are here. Back on the ground again, this time he directed his magic beneath the surface instead of around him, simply on a whim. The comms remained silent, and his team was busy rushing into their suits, so in the meantime, he had nothing to do, and his actions were just a passing curiosity with no real expectations. However, not a moment later, after his magic probed beneath the soil, his eyes lit up and, fuck, he couldn't help but curse aloud. Subsequently, almost by instinct, his arms sank to the ground, palms pressing firmly against the soil. In his excitement, he didn't care how much magic he was unleashing. The rocks and dirt around him had even begun to levitate, as if gravity itself were faltering. His vast, endless ocean of magic surged outward like a flood rushing underground, and the deeper it spread, the wider his eyes grew in disbelief. Water, there was no mistaking it. Absolutely, there was a large reservoir of water directly below. A little deeper, but it was there, about 100 meters under him. Hang on, boss man, we're almost ready. Maybe it was the curse he let slip into the open comms, but not long after, Howard's voice rang inside his helmet. No, Howard, everyone, he replied excitedly. There's water underground, I found water underground. A moment of silence stretched, and he didn't get an immediate response. For a heartbeat, he thought the other end hadn't received the message, and just as he was about to repeat himself, someone finally exclaimed from the other side. You're not joking, right? Wait, no, how sure are you, boss? Mr. Caesar, how far down is it? How did you even find it? One by one, more scientists joined the comms, each voice alive with the same excitement. Why wouldn't they be excited? It hadn't even been an hour, and already they were hearing that water had been discovered on Mars, something that had only ever been speculated and never confirmed. With my magic, Maverick responded, rolling his eyes at the obvious. How much longer are you guys going to take? A few minutes, boss man, everyone wants to go. Everyone, Howard emphasized. He, too, sounded just as eager as the rest. Okay, just give me a heads up once everyone's ready. He wasn't surprised at their enthusiasm. As long as there were enough suits in the lab for everyone to gear up, it was fine. Besides, the portal didn't cost him anything. It was like opening a door, and voila, welcome to Mars. In the meantime, he got back to his feet, glanced around, and opened a portal once again, transferring himself to a point far away, as far as his eyes could reach. Curiosity bubbled inside him. He had to know. Was it just a little? Was it only there? Could there be more than one? Once again, he crouched, pressed his palms to the ground, and probed. His smile grew wider. It was a little deeper here, but regardless, he detected water underground again. And it wasn't just a small pocket, it was a vast reservoir, just like the first point he had checked. Even though his magical sense couldn't spread underground as widely as it did in open air, he could still detect a range of at least 1,000 meters below, through rock and soil. What excited him most was that, at the end of his probe, the reservoir was still there, meaning it extended far deeper than his magical sense could reach. He wanted to keep checking, but after getting to his feet, he let the exhilaration wash over him first. Later, he thought, suppressing the urge, there would be plenty of time. Besides, this was only the beginning. Once the base was up and research underway, his team could fan out across the planet. Some adjustments to the overall plan were inevitable now that water was confirmed, but they were all heading in a positive direction nonetheless. Previously, locating water had been a task on the list, but that section could now be removed. Resources would naturally be redirected toward other priorities, determining how much water was in this reservoir, whether others existed in different locations, and whether their chemical compositions matched. All good news, and the mission had barely even begun. As for starting to build the base and how it would be done, that had long been discussed and even set into motion. Having surfaced on the planet, he could now come and go at will, bringing in and taking out anything he needed. Why haul bricks one by one when he could transport entire pre-built sections and put together a base like a massive Lego creation? The plan was to have sections of the base completed in portions on Earth first, then transport and connect them, much like how the ISS was expanded. Of course, this included bringing along the necessary machinery to operate such a large-scale project. The first structures planned for completion were a decent-sized living space, a storage area, and a small research center, which shouldn't take much time. The entire base of operations, on the other hand, would be a gradual process, estimated to take perhaps a year. Meanwhile, a team would always be stationed here, rotated periodically, of course. Today, though, everyone was coming here simply to satisfy their inner curiosity, indulging the childish thrill of walking on the surface of another planet. Chapter 259, Into the Red III, ch. 279. On a wide stretch of rust-red ground, where broken stones and drifting dust shaped the lonely landscape, a group of people stood in silence, their bodies fully covered in protective attire, facing the fading light of the setting sun. Click. Click. Cameras clicked, flashes washing over the group while they seized that single heartbeat of time. One recording settled into a still image built from ones and zeros, and the other drifted into a moving picture, shaped by runes and magical energy. The picture revealed a small group of men and women, all dressed in identical outfits, standing on rust-colored sands while a gentle crimson glow spread across the sky. The landscape behind them lifted into rolling hills of rock and dust, and in front of the group, a planted flag swayed softly in the pale, passing wind. The moment carried the grainy charm of footage captured on a 70s camera. In the years to come, these images would hang in museums and fill the pages of history books, marking the moment humanity stepped into a new chapter, perhaps of its entire existence. Nearly half a day had passed since Maverick opened the portal between Earth and Mars, and his team still buzzed with restless energy. The setting sun cast long shadows as they wandered like toddlers in a sandbox, scooping rust-colored sand, picking at odd rocks, and staring at everything with eyes so wide they could hold the horizon. The sunset on Mars lacked the bold colors of Earth, yet it was no less mesmerizing. Deep orange and gold lingered in the sky, and the light stretched thin as it washed the horizon with gentle blues and muted reds, as if the sun were slipping behind a veil of dust. As the glow settled across the landscape, everyone agreed that the moment belonged in the history books. To mark it, Maverick added a final touch by planting a simple flag in the ground and gathered the team for a photo. They stood side by side, captivated as they watched the pale sun sink toward the horizon. To Maverick's left and right stood Howard and Norex, while Bucky and Howard's wife took their places at the sides, and the others fell naturally into a loose line behind them. The flag stood at the front, nothing more than a simple piece of cloth covered with everyone's signatures on both sides. It carried no symbol and belonged to no nation, and even though it had been a decision made on a whim, it felt more meaningful than any polished emblem. The initial base will be ready for installation in about a month. After today's little triumph, I think it is safe to say the team is fired up and ready to make it happen as soon as possible, Howard said quietly as the wind brushed against them, while also running through the plan for the coming weeks. I leave everything to you. Maverick listened with a thoughtful nod. Just don't call me every day to transport things. My schedule at the school is already tight enough. Still until the base is finished. Howard smiled at the fading light. After that, once a week should be fine, right? He turned his head slightly. Can you two drop the work talk for a bit? Maria let out a small breath as she held onto Howard's arm. Take this in, we're actually standing on another planet. Listen to your lady, Howard, Maverick chuckled. Maria smiled and glanced at him. On a serious note, a year ago I remember this was all just talk, but I'm sure of it now, Mr. Caesar. Your grand vision will come true someday. Maverick leaned his head slightly, a sly glint in his eyes. So, does that mean you didn't believe me before? He asked, raising a brow. Howard quickly answered for her, raising his hands. You can't blame her. What you proposed back then would have sounded absurd to anyone. Bucky also chuckled. I'm taking Howard's side on this, boss. Even with the crazy things I've seen, not once in my life did I think I'd stand on an alien world. There's literally an alien next to you. Maverick nudged his head toward Norex. All three of them turned to Norex, and, shrugging together, smiled. He doesn't count. The sun slipped lower and lower, casting the land in quiet, muted color. As night fell, the Martian sky grew sharper than anything they had ever seen. Without humidity to blur the stars and without pollution to dim them, the heavens stretched above like black glass sprinkled with silver dust. Unlike on Earth, where stars twinkled, here they shone with hard, unwavering brightness that made the universe feel almost within reach. It was a moment they knew would stay with them forever. Even when the light faded, they did not move to leave. Curiosity kept them wandering since everything around them seemed fresh and unfamiliar. They noticed every rock, every glimmer of mineral, and every change in the sky, and this made them want to begin studying it all at once, in that very moment. But hunger and exhaustion still reminded them of their human limits, and they could not stay without food or sleep for long. Nevertheless, Maverick did not rush them and allowed them to savor the moment. Only after they insisted did he lead them back through the gateway, and the entire team went out for a celebratory dinner, still buzzing with excitement. Time slipped by steadily, with days turning into weeks and weeks stretching into months. March slowly gave way to April, and the weather followed suit, changing without warning. The chill of winter receded as spring made its cautious entrance, sending warm breezes to mingle with rain that came and went like whispered thoughts. Soon, May arrived quietly, without much notice. Nothing remarkable happened at Hogwarts during that time. Although the Quidditch excitement had reached new heights now that the All-Stars were playing for their house teams. Dumbledore, too, seemed unusually cheerful, though no one suspected it was because he had been cured of his life-threatening ailment. The old man was, well, clearly up to something, but Maverick did not bother to find out. At the same time, while the school carried on as usual, Maverick's schedule was almost overflowing. For 2 months, nearly every afternoon after classes, he functioned as a living gateway, ferrying materials, trucks, heavy machinery, and all the supplies required for the Mars mission. The initial base expanded rapidly, resting on a solid foundation designed to endure violent dust storms, and it was finished in just over a month. On the bright side, with the machinery finally running, Maverick no longer had to shoulder every heavy task. A portion of his team was now stationed on the Mars base, already beginning their research. Now, Maverick's visits were limited to delivering supplies or rotating personnel only, while the crew handled the completion of compartments and installations independently. This growing autonomy allowed him to focus on other matters. By early May, with his routine returning to normal, he finally had time to consider a project of his own: constructing a gateway through alchemy between Mars and Earth. Even though he now only needed to serve as a hub once a week, enabling his team to move between the planets independently would make the operation far more efficient. It might sound easy, but it was far from it. For starters, even with his expertise as a master alchemist, the magical system alone offered no way to bypass its limitations. Yet by combining it with the sorcery system, he could theoretically create a stable teleportation device linking the two bases. This time, though, he wasn't drawing on ideas from his previous life. Instead, it would be a project entirely his own, with no theoretical blueprints to rely on, and he would have to design, test, and complete it on his own. It was certainly difficult, but not beyond his abilities. He felt confident that, given enough time, he could bring the project to life, possibly even completing it before the year was out. And speaking of the year, it was now early May and just a month away from year-end exams. That meant exams, exams, and exams, and being a teacher, he was responsible for creating them, and he had to prepare 5 sets this year, from 1st to 3rd years and 6th and 7th. Who would have thought a dignified archmage would be reduced to juggling minutes like this? But even if he wanted to complain, he had only himself to blame. After all, who had asked him to fall into Dumbledore's pyramid scheme and agree to professor 2 whole subjects? Maybe it was time, he thought, sitting in his Hogwarts office with a steaming cup of coffee, to pester the old man about hiring someone for the alchemy classes, at least for the younger students. Because next year his schedule would only get tighter. Taking a sip and exhaling the steam, he set the cup back on the table and leaned back. And just then, he felt his pocket vibrate, reached in, and pulled out his phone. It was, he hummed, raising an eyebrow, Lucius. Despite his busy schedule over the past 2 months, he had not neglected the important matters that would feed into next year's plans. For starters, at the end of April, Minister Greengrass had finally informed him that the ministry, or at least all its regular departments, was under his complete authority, with the right people placed in the right positions. Meanwhile, Lucius, his very own Snape, kept him updated on the pureblood circles, their movements, and whether any moron was planning something that could cause him trouble. Fortunately, they had been quiet, and perhaps unfortunately, too quiet. After Pettigrew had so conveniently escaped, no word of him had been heard, even within the Death Eater circles, and not a single mention of the supposedly dead noseless wanker had appeared in their communications. But it seems that was all about to change. Interesting, he murmured, a smile tugging at his lips as he looked at the text. Chapter 260, Plans in Plain Sight I.Ch. 280. Rumble. The sky convulsed as thunderclouds crashed against one another in a furious, endless cycle. Crackle. Lightning burst outward and wild, twisting forks, and each flash framed the massive structure below in stark white, turning it into a titan standing defiantly beneath a sky that seemed determined to swallow it whole. Below, the sea raged. Waves heaved upward and smashed against the cliffs with furious strength, exploding into spray that vanished into the storm winds. The entire island felt locked between 2 wraths, one above and one below, and the air pulsed with raw, crackling pressure. Azkaban, island, fortress, storm, and sea all work together as if the world built this place to cage the damned. Its very name is tied to despair, its walls echo with madness, and its inmates rot under the presence of dementors who feed on every trace of happiness and trap them with their darkest memories. Only once in its entire history has anyone ever escaped from here, and that single incident was immediately buried under layers of countermeasures as soon as the method was discovered. It was, in truth, a rather unremarkable escape, simply exploiting a loophole and nothing to do with overwhelming magic. To this day, a forceful escape was considered impossible, as the prisoners could barely hold themselves together after the Dementors had their way with them. An attack from the outside was never even considered, perhaps because in the dreadful fortress's long history, nothing like that had ever happened. BOOM. Amid the thunderclaps shaking the skies and the roar of the ocean, suddenly, a deafening explosion tore through the eastern side of the colossal structure, carving a charred scar of molten rock across the wall. Roar! From the jagged breach, a torrent of fire erupted in a sweeping inferno, curling and twisting like a massive serpent that howled against the raging storm. Moving closer to the opening, 2 silhouettes became clear, one cloaked entirely in black, a hood pulled low over their face, and the other a woman who looked as if madness itself had taken shape. Her eyes were bulging, and her smile looked wicked and unhinged as she lowered her wand, surveying the carnage she had unleashed with unsettling satisfaction. Terror at Azkaban, death and destruction ensue. Setting the stack of papers down, Maverick leaned back in his chair, and a light smirk appeared on his lips. His eyes drifted once more to the moving picture beneath the headline, where the scene of Azkaban replayed in stark detail. Thunder and lightning raged across the sky, the sea thrashed violently against the cliffs, and the prison's eastern wall had been torn open like a jagged, bleeding scar. It was a prison break, obviously, though one that started from the outside. A band of dark wizards led by a mysterious great magi shattered the outer defenses and threw Azkaban into turmoil. The Aurors arrived almost instantly and fought hard until the situation finally settled under their control. Well, that was the official report, at least. The article claimed the Ministry's elite Aurors arrived just in time to stop the chaos from spreading, conveniently leaving out any mention of escapes. If it were any other time, he would have scoffed at the article, however. This time he couldn't even if he wanted to. Everything had happened from start to finish, from the chaos to the aftermath and even the reports, all of it unfolding under his knowing, or rather, under his acquiescence. In fact, he had been there at Azkaban when it all happened. At first, when he received the news from Lucius, he was a bit taken aback, because he remembered nothing like this happening in the original story, at least before Voldemort's resurrection. But just as quickly he brushed the thought aside, because he had learned by now that not everything would happen in the canonical order or even happen at all. Still, though, logically speaking, launching an attack on Azkaban would be sheer madness for any ordinary witch or wizard, or even for a daring group of them. It was simply not worth it, because, terrifying as the prison was hailed to be, the inmates there were nearly all nothing but magus rank or lower. To risk getting caught, or worse dying for a bunch of magus rank prisoners, would simply be a stupid decision. Moreover, it was no secret that the prison had a direct link to the Ministry of Magic, and elite Aurors, including Britain's great magi, could be dispatched in no time should any ruckus occur. Not to mention, the guards there were not exactly nobodies either, and by guards, actual witches and wizards, few in number, yes, but still stationed throughout the prison. After all, if it were only Dementors guarding the prison, the first thing that would happen to the prisoners would be death by starvation. In other words, it would have been impossible if it had been just a bunch of Death Eaters at the magus rank to pull it off. But somehow, it turned out they had help from an unknown great mage who led the operation. Maverick had no idea how Voldemort's sorry state had even managed to convince a great mage to do it, and he did not care anyway. Moving on, what really happened was that the mysterious great mage struck Azkaban from the outside and freed Voldemort's Death Eaters, including Bellatrix Lestrange, the most dangerous inmate locked in the prison at the time. The madwoman was a great magi herself and Voldemort's most formidable lieutenant, having served him during the upheaval that had shaken wizarding Britain over a decade ago. The part about the Ministry dispatching its elite force in time to intercept was true as well, with Alistair Moody leading the offensive. Unfortunately, they were still unable to prevent all of the Death Eaters from escaping. After all, Moody was only one man and could not contend with two great magi working together. To their credit, though, the Aurors did manage to stop many of those attempting to escape, leaving only a dozen or so of the hundreds to truly become fugitives. Meanwhile, Maverick simply made sure no Aurors died in the skirmish, with a miss here and a nudge there. Basically, every single exchange of hexes was completely under his control. Of course, nobody there knew a puppet master was twirling his fingers and assumed everything had happened by coincidence. He also did not take any action to stop the fugitives who escaped, including Bellatrix Lestrange. Anyways, they would not be making any moves before old Valdi was resurrected and would likely lay low until then. It was not a guess, and he had confirmed it by listening to the exchanges between Bellatrix and the other great magus. Mad as the woman was, she would follow Voldemort's orders as if they were gospel. What he did do, however, amid all the chaos, was plant a highly advanced tracking magic from the sorcery system on every single one who had managed to escape from Moody and his men. Now, there was nowhere on Earth they could hide from him, and more importantly, he would know exactly where Voldemort was. Outside the floor-to-ceiling window lay only darkness, the hour creeping past midnight while the castle slept in utter silence. His train of thoughts were interrupted when his magic alerted someone closing in on his office door. What's this old thing doing here in the middle of the night? A knock came, but before the second one, he waved his hand and the door opened, revealing Dumbledore, thank Merlin not in his nightgown, holding a candlelight on the other side. "Headmaster, to what do I owe this untimely visit?" The old man unceremoniously let himself in, though Maverick saw none of the usual expressions on his face. Even that damn annoying twinkle in his eyes was gone. And while Dumbledore tried to hide it, Maverick could tell from the first glance that plenty of bubbling thoughts were churning inside his head. He sat down across the table from him, set the candle on the surface, and let out an exhale. "I take it you've seen the newspaper?" His eyes darted momentarily to the stack of papers in front of Maverick first, then to him. "Hard to miss," Maverick shrugged. "Is there something you want to talk about, Headmaster?" Dumbledore stared at him absent-mindedly for a moment, then instead of answering, he posed a question in return. "You know what this means, right? You'll have to be a little bit more specific." "Lord Voldemort," he said, as if releasing something heavy from his chest. "He's ready to make his move." Maverick leaned back first, resting his elbow on the chair's armrest and tilting his head slightly. He really wanted to pry open the old man's skull at this moment and check his brain to see what in Merlin's name was wrong. A dignified archmage behaving so pathetically, it was honestly embarrassing. "You think they might start terrorizing Britain again or make a move on Hogwarts? Or," he said after a brief pause, "come after Potter?" "Indeed," Dumbledore nodded slowly. "I spoke with Severus. He tells me the mark Lord Voldemort left on him has grown, considerably stronger all at once." "You think he's somehow resurrected?" "No," shaking his head, Dumbledore also leaned back. "The Dark Lord, he must have found a way at least, and he is preparing." Maverick let out a long exhale and decided to speak directly about what was on his mind. "Headmaster, I don't mean to be rude or anything, but why are you acting like the whole world is about to end? Even if that lunatic regains the full power of his heyday, you're still Albus Dumbledore. You've even broken free from his curse, so why are you behaving? Embarrassingly." He paused briefly, then added, "Forgive me for saying it, but like a coward." Dumbledore raised his head, but did not answer. "What is it about him that makes you look so weak?" Maverick continued without pause. "I can't even recognize you like this." "You don't understand his madness, Maverick." Dumbledore drew in a deep breath. "You weren't there. He is evil. The purest, darkest kind of evil you can imagine, the sort that would do anything to get his way. And if he thinks he can't reach you, he will go after those around you, threaten them, take hostages, anything." Merlin's thick beard. How much had old Valdi tortured this man psychologically while he was alive? "During his rampage over a decade ago," Dumbledore went on, murmuring, "the Dark Lord used every vile trick he could imagine to strike at me. Knowing he could not best me in magic, he turned his cruelty on everyone close to me. My students, my friends, my allies. So many perished. And even without ever confronting me directly, he ensured I suffered every ounce of pain he could inflict. Even those who survived, like the Longbottoms, remain trapped in hospital wards to this day, neither truly dead nor truly alive." He lifted his head, his expression solemn, and met Maverick's gaze. "The Dark Lord is a danger of an entirely different kind. People think he is a madman, and they are absolutely right, but I know that boy. He is mad beyond reconciliation, yet shrewd in his thinking. He is a schemer, the most vile of his kind. Otherwise, he would have confronted me directly instead of resorting to all those dirty, despicable means. He is not Gellert," he sighed, "nor a straightforward terrorist. It would be foolish to underestimate him or his methods simply because someone might surpass him in magical skill. I learned that lesson the hard way." A tense silence stretched across the office as the two, one old, one young, held each other's gaze. Maverick's expression had grown serious as well, for what Dumbledore had said was neither an overglorification nor an exaggeration. Now was Maverick being overly confident in his own strength, so much so that he hadn't even considered those points? Not at all. He was well aware of just how much of a lunatic Voldemort was. Yet, as Dumbledore had pointed out, he also knew that Voldemort was a cunning, scheming mind, one who planned far beyond raw madness. At this moment, Voldemort was at his weakest, reduced to a decadent wraith, with nothing more pressing than reclaiming a physical body of his own. And precisely because of that, Maverick was fairly certain Voldemort would not allow his dogs to fuck around and find out, risking exposure or revealing his location before he was fully resurrected. Anyway, Maverick had marked every single one he had allowed to escape, deep down to the root of their souls. They could not hide from him, and as a result, Voldemort would now always remain under his radar. It's not that I haven't considered those points, Headmaster. Maverick gave the old man a nod, briefly diverting his gaze, and let out a sigh. Perhaps, he thought, it was about time to come completely clean. With that thought, he raised his arm, coiled his fingers, and his patroness sprang to life between them, splitting into two shimmering ravens. In front of Dumbledore's inquisitive gaze, he murmured, "Go," and the patroness shot forward, phasing effortlessly through the window, while Maverick met the old wizard's eyes once more. It's best if Professor McGonagall and Professor Flitwick are here as well to discuss countermeasures against the Dark Lord. Dumbledore tilted his head, a flicker of puzzlement in his expression at Maverick's sudden, inexplicable actions. "No," Maverick said quietly. "To confess, I haven't been entirely honest with all of you." Chapter 261. Plans in Plain Sight, II, ch. 281. Candlelight flickered softly, blending with the steady orange glow of the table lamps, sending restless shadows crawling across the quiet room. "This had better be something important, Professor. I have had a rather exhausting day." Wearing her nightgown, and certainly not in her best mood, Minerva McGonagall gave Maverick a pointed glare as she took her seat. "My apologies for the untimely summons, Professors." Maverick slid 3 steaming teacups outward across the table with a humble smile. "If you truly mean that," McGonagall muttered, "then how about taking over supervising detention for those 2 trouble magnets of my house for the rest of the term?" She blew across her cup before taking a long sip, as if she needed it more than air. Across the table sat Maverick and Dumbledore, while beside her was Flitwick, who had arrived with her after the abrupt patroness Maverick sent to their private chambers. "I'd rather fight an army of aliens again, Professor." Maverick chuckled and leaned back. Supervising the Weasley twins' detention, he really wasn't joking. "Tell you what," he added, "I'll have the newest model of magic vision delivered to your office next week instead." Cough, and just then, Flitwick cleared his throat, because after all, McGonagall was not the only one dragged out of bed in the middle of the night. "Of course, it's for the 2 of you." Maverick's smile grew, glancing at the little man across from him. "Bah, you don't have to, Professor," Flitwick said with a sheepish grin, "though I do rather like the color violet." "Duly noted." McGonagall rolled her eyes at their antics, then turned to Maverick while also glancing briefly between him and Dumbledore in front of her. Her mentor had been rather quiet, she thought, and she sighed inwardly. He must also not be in a good mood after being summoned so abruptly. "Maverick, speaking of aliens," she continued seriously, "surely it can't be another invasion, right?" "Ah, no." Maverick shook his head, then paused briefly, although not entirely magical either. He glanced sideways at the old wizard, then back to the 2 again. "First, I hope you will allow me to finish speaking once I start. It's a matter of great importance, and I'd like to explain everything clearly." At his words, McGonagall, Flitwick, and even Dumbledore all turned serious. Knowing Maverick, anything described as not small or of great importance carried tremendous weight. "Go on, or do you want us to swear an oath first?" Flitwick asked. "No." Maverick shook his head and snapped his fingers decisively, summoning the mirror dimension to envelop the entire room. "There's no need for oaths, but please don't mind my precautions." "Truly fascinating magic. I can no longer sense the presence of Hogwarts," Flitwick murmured, turning his head to inspect the space. He did not panic, nor did the others, and they simply assumed Maverick was taking precautions to keep their discussion discreet. Still, here at the heart of Hogwarts, they could not grasp the need for such extreme precautions. Only Dumbledore narrowed his eyes, and that was it. He remained patient, more curious than concerned, wondering what this confession might entail. Maverick raised his arm, and on his 3rd finger, an exquisite, ancient-looking ring materialized. Its face bore a black stone etched with intricate, interwoven lines forming a spiral labyrinth, with tiny runes circling the edge, pulsating faintly with a soft inner light. The 3 did not recognize the symbol, assuming it only to be a storage ring, and waited, anticipating what might come next. Another summon? something otherworldly drawn from the ring. But contrary to their expectations, Maverick simply lowered his arm, as if the earlier display had meant nothing. Puzzled, they exchanged glances, but Maverick ignored them and finally got to the point. By this time next year, he leaned forward, hands clasped together, elbows on his knees, eyes shadowed by a furrowed brow. I'll have a plan in motion that will reveal magic to the entire world. Perhaps it was the weight of the revelation, or simply too much of a bombshell, but neither Dumbledore, McGonagall, nor Flitwick showed any outward reaction to his declaration. Still, Maverick raised a hand, motioning them to remain silent. "Allow me to explain everything first," he said, thinking it best to start with Valdi, since the plan would ultimately end with him as well. "It all begins with someone you are all quite familiar with, Tom Riddle, who, contrary to popular belief, is not dead." The short hand of the clock had unknowingly passed 2 digits before Maverick was finally able to narrate everything swirling inside his head. He did not hold back this time. From Voldemort to his Horcruxes, how he had discovered them, how many he had destroyed, and how many remained, he told them everything, including his plan to destroy the rest. Of course, not everything he said was true to the letter, but he made sure it was as believable as possible. Some, like how he came to know about the Horcruxes, he attributed directly to the Sorcerer Supreme. Anyway, even if they went to her for confirmation, which Maverick was sure they wouldn't, he was confident the old lady would give him face or cover for him with some clever excuse. Beyond Voldemort, he also explained why he had meddled in the country's politics, even going so far as to orchestrate a coup to replace the minister. He mentioned the Malfoy family and how they were now his spies, and with the movements of the Ministry of Magic and the Death Eater circles under his control, he narrated how everything would fall into place next year. I know I'm not giving all the details, and that's intentional. You may have a general idea of the MC's plan by now, but I want to leave some surprises for when I bring you the scenes themselves. Without giving them a chance to interrupt, Maverick concluded his explanation, covering the precautions, the risks, and just how far he had prepared, while leaving some plans still in motion. When he finished, he could at least see their pupils relax slightly, which he took as a promising sign. "Do you have any idea, young man?" the stern lady finally snapped, forgetting to call him even professor, whether deliberately or by accident, Maverick couldn't tell. "Do you have any idea how completely mad you sound?" "Yeah, I've heard that from a couple of people," Maverick sighed, leaning back and raising his head to the ceiling. Every single person he had confessed his plans to had dubbed him mad, so it barely registered with him. How can that aloof, moronic, muscle-bound man even agree to all that, even agreeing to help you? "Don't blame the teacher, Professor," Maverick said lazily, still resting his head on the sofa's back. "He's just as fed up with this ridiculous system as I am." He lifted his head again, meeting her gaze. Meanwhile, Flitwick and Dumbledore remained silent, letting the confrontation play out. In other words, whatever questions or objections they had, their colleague was handling them just fine while confronting Maverick. The world is changing, people's mindset, culture, everything, technology most of all. Maverick paused to make his point sink in. "You cannot deny how fast the Muggle world is advancing, Professor. Sooner or later, we will be discovered. And when it happens all at once, what do you think will follow?" "There will be chaos," Flitwick finally blurted. Maverick glanced at him briefly, then returned his gaze to McGonagall. "Eventually, the world will settle, but between chaos and peace, there will, make no mistake, be a lot of blood. Unless, of course," Maverick continued, lowering his tone, "we control how we're exposed. The ICW will never agree." McGonagall replied matter-of-factly, and with good reason. Many of the council's members were centuries old, and some of those stubborn fools stood at the Archmage level. Their thinking was so backward that Maverick didn't even want to bother correcting it. Only something uncontrollable would force a change. In other words, when the exposure became overwhelming in a single moment, they would have no choice but to accept it. "I know," Maverick said equally matter-of-factly. "Otherwise, why do you think I'm having this whole drama played out in front of the world? Do you think allowing that evil, twisted lunatic to resurrect fully is some kind of spectacle?" McGonagall's voice rose sharply with every word. "How do we know that madman will even walk into your trap? And if he does, how can you possibly be certain everything will unfold according to your script? And most importantly, do you understand how many innocent lives you'll be placing at risk if you fail, or if your plan strays even a little? She barraged him with question after question until she looked utterly exhausted, and Maverick made no move to interrupt or take offense, allowing her to vent freely. In truth, he understood. 90% of her fury toward his plan stemmed from Valdi alone, for during the madman's reign, she had suffered greatly as well, particularly targeted as Dumbledore's lieutenant, and having lost many dear to her in his carnage. A long silence filled the room as the three adults fixed their gaze on the youngest among them, waiting for his response. In truth, they too would be far happier if the Sacristy Act did not exist. It had been created to safeguard the future of the wizarding world, true, but circumstances back then, and now, were completely different. Now, there was already an unspoken agreement between the Muggle world and the magical world to coexist in harmony, and the leaders of the entire Muggle world were fully aware of magic. Moreover, during the last World War, the balance of power was clear, established, and understood by both sides. Muggles had their weapons of mass destruction, while Magicals had living, breathing weapons of their own. No longer did one side need to fear the other, and this was no longer an age where someone could be burned at the stake simply for being misunderstood. Yet still, the magical world's hierarchy insisted on remaining hidden, and so much time had passed that this secrecy had become accepted as the norm by the majority of the wizarding public. If you can answer Minerva's questions satisfactorily, Maverick, then you can count on my help, Dumbledore finally said amid the uncomfortable silence, drawing everyone's attention to him, even Maverick's. He hadn't expected the old wizard to speak so decisively. Albus, McGonagall began, but Dumbledore raised a hand, turning squarely to Maverick. I'll be honest, I always knew you were up to something big from the very first day Minerva told me about you. However, you have truly exceeded my expectations. What, you want to call me a madman too? Maverick asked, arching a brow. Not really, Dumbledore replied, ignoring the script entirely. I'm sure you've read history and know that you aren't the first to attempt breaking the Sacred Secrecy Act. The last one was just as powerful as you, with an army of witches and wizards, and he still failed. I am not. I know you're not Gellert, Professor Caesar. I just want to remind you of that point. Why exactly? I'm not planning to take over the world, and I'm sure as hell not planning to launch a campaign against Muggles. No, you're not. Your plan, Dumbledore glanced briefly at the others, then back at Maverick. Mad as it sounds, is the first one I believe has a real chance of succeeding. ALBUS, McGonagall exclaimed. Minerva, let me finish, Dumbledore sighed, continuing. You've even gone so far as to innovate new technology on the Muggle side, just to ensure your plan to expose magic has a better chance of success. You know, I'm still having a difficult time processing it all. The meticulous steps you've taken. He paused and in the end, fixed Maverick with an expectant gaze. Which is why I say, if you can satisfyingly answer Minerva's earlier questions, I shall not hesitate to bind myself by oath even in support of your plan. Even though Dumbledore had not formally given his agreement, it was clear from his words that as long as Maverick could prove he could execute his plan flawlessly, then Dumbledore was essentially saying that he would aid in breaking, or rather destroying, the one taboo that had governed the entire modern magical age. Even Maverick was taken aback by the decisive declaration. Fuck, is this going to turn into another pyramid scheme? A cold sweat broke out on Maverick's forehead as he thought it over. Usually, when something involving this old wizard went a little too smoothly, Maverick was the one who ended up suffering later. So you simply want to know what gives me confidence that things won't go out of control? Maverick asked, rubbing the ring on his finger. Precisely. Even with your teacher, the many others you've enlisted, the ministry, and even the Muggle government assisting behind the scenes as you mentioned, I remain unconvinced that innocent lives won't be affected. It's the bloody center of Great Britain you want as your stage, after all. Flitwick chimed in from across the table, leaning back with arms crossed. Maverick took a moment to consider their questions, and they gave him the time. Sighing, he finally made up his mind and raised his head, meeting each of their gazes in turn. What gives me confidence is him, he said, and they looked at him puzzled. Who? McGonagall asked. Then, all of a sudden, a sound came from everywhere and nowhere at once, as if spoken directly into their hearts. Me. Chapter 262. Plans in Plain Sight, ch. 282. I was hoping I wouldn't have to resort to this. With his mind made up, Maverick met the three of their gazes in turn and sighed. It isn't my place, really, to reveal his existence to you, though I was told I could ask for help with anything I want, and revealing his existence in this situation, I believe, counts as help. Listening to Maverick speak in such a cryptic manner, the three professors exchanged puzzled looks. Resort to what? Reveal who? Wasn't it simply a matter of telling them who or what had given Maverick the confidence that nothing would go wrong? So why did it sound like he was about to drop a name so profound it might as well be Merlin himself? Maverick ignored their baffled expressions and continued injecting his magic in a mysterious rhythm into the ring on his finger. Though if he knew what they were thinking, he would have definitely given them a thumbs up. Meanwhile, silence stretched between the three veteran professors as they tried to guess who this mysterious person could be. Based on everything they knew about Maverick, they had a handful of possibilities, and to their credit, aside from his closest people and his teacher, they probably understood him best. A moment later, McGonagall eventually couldn't hold it in anymore and asked the first name that came to mind. Is it a limp? She asked skeptically. After all, it was no secret that Maverick and the woman had some kind of cooperative relationship. But still, that name alone wasn't enough to change her mind, nor Flitwick's or Dumbledore's. Their fear of old Valdy was not simply because he was an archmage, but because of his maddening and utterly unscrupulous character. So what if Maverick had 3 archmagi and numerous great magi tagging along behind him? That would amount to nothing if they couldn't stop Valdy from arranging other means, like having his dogs run a slaughter while they were trying to keep or capture him. Otherwise, Dumbledore would have stopped Voldemort long before he caused carnage across Wizarding Britain over a decade ago. Voldemort was like a cockroach, always slipping away or hiding whenever Dumbledore drew near during his rise. He was difficult to catch and even harder to kill completely, like a persistent pest. What they wanted, more than anything, was a guaranteed way that once he was resurrected, Maverick could contain him, and that no innocent lives would be dragged into the aftermath of Voldemort's prearranged schemes. Maverick shook his head at the mention of the half-giantess, although he did have plans to pull the woman into the blueprint as well. Perhaps during the summer break, he would pay her a visit and go along with his teacher, and if this discussion eventually turned out the way he wanted, Dumbledore as well. With the two of them together, he was 90% certain the old woman would also fall in line. As he sat and thought, he finally sensed something at the edge of his magical awareness, and the ring on his finger gave the corresponding feedback he was expecting. He smiled. "It's him," he finally said, no longer keeping them in suspense, speaking without really looking in any particular direction. "Him who, Professor? Please spare us the riddles. It's the middle of the night for Merlin's sake." McGonagall rolled her eyes, genuinely growing tired of it. And just as she finished speaking, before anyone else could voice a word, a voice, seemingly speaking directly to the root of their souls, suddenly reverberated through the room, causing all 3 of the veterans to crease their brows and, just as quickly, causing their pupils to dilate. It was only one syllable. "Emmy," they heard, but it carried so much weight that they literally felt the word press against their skin. And that wasn't all, because they suddenly felt their bodies freeze, no longer under the control of their consciousness, as if some unfathomable power had rooted them to their place, like a higher being pressing their aura upon a lower one. One must know that McGonagall and Flitwick were veteran great magi, with magical senses honed to such an extraordinary degree that only a mage a full rank higher could sneak up on them, let alone freeze their actions entirely. But that couldn't be true, because Dumbledore looked equally startled, frozen in shock, and he was arguably the most powerful archmage alive. There was only one logical explanation for it. They all remembered, from their youth, how meeting powerful teachers or other formidable individuals made them feel small, reduced to the point where they couldn't even act on instinct, as if nothing besides their own thoughts was under their control. Not only that, they themselves had flexed their magic occasionally as well whenever the situation called throughout their long lives, so they weren't at all foreign to the feeling. With just that single syllable, they were left completely at the mercy of the being who spoke it, utterly helpless. Of course, Maverick wasn't like them. He knew exactly who it was, and the reason he wasn't affected like Dumbledore and his two other colleagues was simply because he was spared. After hearing the expected sound, a sigh first escaped his lips. After all, he wasn't entirely certain the old fossil would show up even if he was told he would. Then the exhale turned into a smile, and he rose to his feet. He waved a hand, and ignoring the shocked expressions of his colleagues, the surroundings began to change according to the will of his magic, like a puzzle assembling itself on its own. The mirror dimension rippled, glass-like transparent shards flickering with light, walls, tables, chairs, ceiling, everything moving as if guided by an unseen hand. Where once they had sat 2 by 2 facing each other across a coffee table, they now sat in a single line in front of a large table, the opposite side empty except for a single, exquisite-looking chair. Everything else had disappeared, leaving a clean space devoid of walls or sky, a perfectly appropriate stage for the arrival of a living legend. The transformation took only a second, maybe 2, and was over almost as quickly as it began. With that complete, Maverick remained standing, waiting, while glancing sideways at Dumbledore, McGonagall, and Flitwick, who were still seated, frozen in shock. The corner of his eye twitched. It wasn't his idea at all to put them in that state. Sure enough, he hadn't been wrong to label that old fossil a legitimate farmer. He just hoped that after all this, the 3 of them wouldn't blame him. This was definitely not his doing, nor did he have the capability, no matter how ridiculously op he was now, to freeze them with just a word. Sigh. Fortunately, the wait wasn't long. Across the table, suddenly in midair, orange sparks began to form, a familiar scene, and Maverick couldn't help but raise a brow. Not surprising, after all, the bald Auntie Yao had said the old man was a sorcerer as well. What made him arch his brows, though, was how clean it was, too clean. The mirror dimension did not so much as ripple, even with someone invading forcefully, which clearly showed that the old man's proficiency in eldritch meditation must be extremely high by now. Subsequently, on the other side, a familiar face appeared, clean, noble, clad in a finely tailored suit, and of course wielding a cane, as Merlin Ambrosius stepped through with absolute majesty. Each tap of his boots, each strike of his cane against the floor, sounded like a bell resonating in their hearts, not harsh or unsettling, but gentle with an air of arrogance. Mentally, Maverick's eyes lit up with stars. Must take notes, must take notes. Expert, definitely an expert farmer. As soon as the legendary wizard stepped out and stopped behind the chair, Maverick smiled and made a respectful bow. Apologies, Mage Supreme, for having disturbed your time. Respect for one's elders had to be shown, especially when that elder was a living legend. But just as he raised his head, he saw more familiar sling ring portals forming behind the old man, catching him momentarily off guard. His first thought was the Sorcerer Supreme crashing the party as well? But he quickly brushed it aside when another realization struck him, and his eyes widened involuntarily as a result. 4 people. He had a guess. No, he was fairly certain of their identities. Although Merlin himself had not specifically named them and had only vaguely mentioned having students, it was not difficult to discern who they were. Now, looking at them, especially judging by their attire, he felt even more confident in his earlier guess. Meanwhile, the moment Maverick said the word Supreme, Dumbledore and the other 2's pupils, already constricted, nearly disappeared. They did not doubt for a second that Maverick was wrong because they still couldn't move, and only a being like that could immobilize them so completely. 1 peak archmage and 2 great magi. And just as those thoughts crossed their minds, they suddenly felt their bodies back under their control, and abruptly, all 3 of them rose to their feet. Even Dumbledore, usually calm in the most difficult situations, was visibly shaken. Literally, his hands trembled at that moment. Their little commotion pulled Maverick out of his stupor as well, and he quickly gathered his thoughts. Glancing to his left and right, he spoke. Headmaster, Professor McGonagall, Professor Flitwick, allow me to introduce you. Supreme Mage Merlin Ambrosius. And, he paused, then looked ahead, glancing between the unfamiliar faces who were smirking at him, unsure of what to say. To Merlin's left stood a woman clad in a sleek, modern dark dress, a rather large black hat tilted over her head. Next to her was a burly man, majestic as hell, with golden hair flowing like a lion's mane. Maverick's first impression was that he might be one of his teacher's ancestors. The resemblance was unmistakable. To Merlin's right was another woman, dressed in an extravagant pink gown, every detail lavish and precise. Beside her stood a stern, lean man in a tailored suit, a fur-lined robe draped over his shoulders. Actually, only 3 of them were smirking at him, while the stern, lean man, looking like a straight-up comic book villain, stared as if Maverick had personally insulted his parents. These 4 people had to be the 4 founders of Hogwarts: Rowena Ravenclaw, Godric Gryffindor, Helga Hufflepuff, and Salazar Slytherin. And sure enough, while he was still at a loss for words on how to introduce them, "Little guy, you don't have to be so tense. We are exactly who you think we are." Chuckling, with a hand over her mouth, the woman in the lavish pink dress winked at him. "Tap." Suddenly, the man in front tapped his majestic cane on the floor, and 4 more chairs materialized, which they all took and sat in unceremoniously. "Sit, children. This meeting has long been overdue," Merlin declared in his deep, bell-like voice, addressing Maverick and his party. Chapter 263, Plans in Plain Sight, IV, ch. 283. I've carried many names over the passage of time. Imris, Alanin, Meodin, a druidic title or 2, though there is one name that has remained constant, which I am sure you children know very well. Contrary to what everyone expected, Merlin did not speak with an air of authority or coldness. Even Maverick had not imagined his tone would be so amiable, especially after that dramatic entrance. His voice carried the warmth of a grandfather addressing his grandchildren, and without realizing it, their sense of edge faded the moment he began talking. Whether some subtle magic was involved was something they did not bother to ponder, and simply listened without interrupting. Those who know the truth of my existence call me Merlin Ambrosius, and yes, children, I am exactly the figure you think I am. Though I prefer that you simply address me as the Supreme Mage, just as my students here do. Having introduced himself, the old wizard fixed his gaze on Maverick and smiled. "You child have been rather busy, I see. Normally, I do not reveal my existence to just anyone, but this is indeed a special case." His eyes then drifted across the table, stopping on each person from left to right. Flitwick, McGonagall, then Maverick, and finally Dumbledore. A child from the lineage of the Phoenix contractors, as expected of his descendant, only a century old and already on the verge of shedding mortal flesh to reach the demigod realm. An approving smile touched his lips as he continued. "Your talent is no less than my students here. Perhaps even greater, since they only reached the rank of warlock 2 centuries into their lives." My lord, I?" Dumbledore swallowed a dry mouthful. His hands were still trembling slightly under the table, despite the strange calmness that had settled after Merlin began speaking. After all, the most renowned legend the magical world had ever known was sitting only a few feet away, and the figures beside him were no less overwhelming. The headmaster of Hogwarts needed only a single glance to guess who they were, because the lion, badger, raven, and serpent on their chests were far too deliberate to be coincidence. Not to mention, the moment he looked at them, his magical sense had practically screamed in alarm, as their aura felt countless times more dense than his own even with how tightly restrained it seemed. "You need not feel intimidated," Merlin said with a slight nod. "And as I mentioned earlier, I prefer to be addressed as the Supreme Mage, Lord and all that. Perhaps I once held the title, but it no longer means anything to me." Without pausing, he turned his gaze back to Maverick. "Let us first discuss why you have summoned me, child, and after that we shall have plenty of time to become acquainted." Seeing the look, Maverick realized it was his cue to speak, so he cleared his throat and gathered his thoughts. But then he remembered he had not told Merlin anything about his plan yet. "Do I have to start from the beginning?" Fortunately, just as the thought crossed his mind, Merlin spared him the trouble, almost as if he had read his mind. "I am well aware, child, that you intend to expose magic to the wider human world. Therefore, I need only know the role I play in it." Is this old fossil keeping tabs on me? Maverick thought nervously, especially seeing that seemingly knowing smile directed at him. Whatever, at least he wasn't going to act against my plans. He cleared his throat again and began. Yes, I intend to completely dismantle the statute of secrecy and expose our world to the non-magicals. He spoke quickly, trying to get everything out in one breath, and just as Merlin had requested, he skipped all the details and focused only on the role he wanted Merlin to play. At the climax of my plan, an Archmage-level duel will take place over the great city of London. It will be controlled, of course, and my people will be stationed everywhere on both the Muggle and magical sides. Some will act as countermeasures to prevent innocent lives from being harmed, while others will focus on spreading the news. Using both Muggle and magical technology, I will ensure the entire world has its eyes on it in the shortest possible time, to the point where it becomes impossible for the ICW to contain the news. Once that goal is achieved, I will bring the duel to an end. Of course, to the outside world, it will appear as if I had no choice but to intervene, and by the end of it, the entire world will know of the existence of the magicals. Basically, I ask for your help, Supreme Mage, as a final safeguard to guarantee that no innocents are harmed during the act. Apart from the Archmage, which I will be, he paused and gestured with his hands as if making quotation marks, trying my best to stop, there may be great magi on the enemy side as well. Of course, I have confidence that my people can handle it, but my colleagues here want a little more assurance, which is why I summoned you. With that, Maverick finished, and the table sank into silence as everyone awaited Merlin's response. The old wizard hummed thoughtfully and, after a moment, gave a small nod. Not the brightest of plans, he murmured, but if everything unfolds as you envision, then this long-standing rule will no longer need to exist. He let out a quiet, almost weary sigh. And I agree with you on this matter, child. There was a time when keeping our world hidden was necessary, but that time has passed. Our world has evolved beyond that, and it is about time we lift the curtain. As he spoke, his gaze swept over the three seated beside Maverick, lingering briefly on Dumbledore. You have my word. I, along with my students, shall act on that day and ensure that no innocent lives are harmed. He turned back to Maverick. So go ahead with your vision. Take the necessary step that our magical world has long needed to take. At his words, Maverick felt a weight lift from his chest. He exhaled without thinking and allowed himself a small, relieved smile. He turned first to his left, toward Dumbledore, whose tired sigh met his gaze, and in that look, Maverick knew the decision had been made. Headmaster, Maverick murmured, and Dumbledore nodded in response. I am convinced, worry not. With the Supreme Mage overseeing matters unseen, I am certain everything will align as you have envisioned. He nodded in response, then glanced to his right, where the two professors also nodded. I shall always stand by Albus' decision, Maverick. You can count on my support. And mine, Flitwick chimed in. Truthfully, I too am weary of hiding ourselves from everyone, and I look forward to stepping into that tomorrow, where the veil is lifted. Thank you. Honestly, you have no idea how much your support means to me. Maverick's words were not just for show, and he was truly sincere. By now, he had truly grown attached to them, seeing them as genuine companions. Maverick's nature had always been like this, which is why he had chosen a path that compelled him to form bonds and interact with many people. Even his subordinates, well, at least those he trusts, he regarded as genuine companions. If he had wished, with the help of the system, he could, of course, have grown stronger than anyone over time, quietly, behind closed doors. In both his previous life and even more in the present, he had always been naturally inclined toward extroversion. After all, what was the point of becoming all-powerful if there was no one to share that glory with? For that reason, even more than Merlin, he cherished Dumbledore, McGonagall, and Flitwick's support, for the bond he shared with them was precious. Setting those thoughts aside for the moment, he turned back to the ancient wizard and offered a sincere, appreciative smile. Thank you, Supreme Mage. I shall not forget this favor. There is no need to call it a favor, Merlin said, shaking his head. It is for the betterment of the magical world in the end, which you, I, and all of us share. He smiled, then briefly glanced to his left and right. Now, with that out of the way, let us become better acquainted. Introduce yourselves, my students, to your juniors. Rowena, From the far left, the woman who appeared to be in her late 20s spoke first. Her face was flawless, and her hair shone black as midnight. Her eyes settled on the half-man with an approving glance. Together with my friends here, I helped found this great castle. And you, young man, I understand today you represent the house named after me. It is an honor, Madam Ravenclaw. Flitwick's eyes visibly sparkled as he bowed courteously. I always had a feeling that your disappearance from history was no simple matter. I suppose I was right. In any case, meeting you in person has long been a dream of mine, and I hope I have not disappointed in guiding the students sorted into the great house of Ravenclaw. I am Godric. The broad-shouldered man, looking every bit a warrior rather than a mage, spoke next. He scanned the 4 people before him with a practiced eye and finally fixed his gaze on McGonagall. You, girl, have my approval. A remarkable talent representing the house named after me. Meanwhile, Maverick caught, from the corner of his eye, McGonagall's face turning crimson at the remark. Merlin? The old man is here. Anyway, did the stern lady actually blush? You remind me of Rowena when she was young, Godric Gryffindor continued, rubbing his chin and finishing with a wide grin. As soon as he finished, a soft, almost ethereal chuckle came from the other side as the woman in the lavish pink gown smiled. Honestly, Helga Hufflepuff was nothing like Maverick had envisioned, and certainly not with that striking look. A stunning face, a body with the right curves in the right places, she was nothing like the plump woman most history books depicted. Indeed, an accurate remark. Rowena also had a face as stern as yours when she was young. On the other side, the founder of the Ravenclaw house rolled her eyes almost to the edge and cast her a sharp glance. That, in turn, made the lady in pink giggle even more. Right, my turn. She waved her hand. I am Helga Hufflepuff. Unfortunately, the young lady representing my house was not invited to this meeting, so I cannot make any remarks about her. She cast Maverick a provocative smirk. Therefore, young man, I shall settle with you. The hell, what did I do? And is this not simply about introducing you old things to us? Of course, Maverick did not say any of that aloud and only shrugged at the woman giving him that look. If you want, I can bring her here, Lady Hufflepuff. Ahaha, you hear that, Salazar? He called me a lady. A quiet sigh followed her remark before the last person in the room who had yet to speak finally did. Do try to mind your manners, Helga. They are your juniors, after all. It was the man who had worn a stern expression through the brief exchange so far, polished like a literal mafia boss. Yet he sounded nothing like what Maverick or his colleagues expected. For one thing, his voice was far too soft, almost like the introverted sibling of the family. Even more surprising, he sounded much too young for someone who was supposedly a millennium old. I am Salazar Slytherin, he continued, and as he spoke, his gaze locked onto Maverick, his expression cooling inexplicably for some unknown reason. Maverick, you boy have an apology to make. The hell, when did I insult this guy's parents? Maverick scrambled through his memory, trying to figure out what it could possibly be, and not long after, something did come to his mind. He remembered that back in the Chamber of Secrets, he might have, maybe, probably, and quite unintentionally, called a statue that was supposedly modeled after Slytherin an ugly monkey. He swallowed. Surely it wasn't about that, right? Was there some magical CCTV or something? Or, he thought of something else. Did that old snake snitch? Chapter 264, Plans in Plain Sight v. Ch. 284. The scorching sun shone brightly over Hogwarts, bathing the fortress in a majestic radiance. Time had a way of slipping by unnoticed when one became too wrapped up in something, and before long, the hours had vanished without anyone realizing it. The meeting had started late into the night, but in what seemed like a single breath, morning slipped away and midday had already arrived. There was far too much to discuss and nowhere near enough time. After all, the legends did not arrive as a timely visit, they had simply dropped by in response to a summon. In any case, Dumbledore, McGonagall, and Flitwick made full use of that golden opportunity, allowing their curiosities to run completely wild. Much of the conversation revolved around magic, naturally. Even though they were educators themselves, their modest reservoir of knowledge could not compare to living, breathing libraries who had walked the world for millennia. Eventually, The talks then drifted toward history, speaking about the magical world of that ancient era, the early days of Hogwarts during its founding, and more importantly, the reason the four founders had suddenly vanished from recorded history. Maverick, too, was curious about the matter, and during the talks he did not simply sit and listen. He would occasionally chime in as well, however, when he finally heard the reason for the four legends' abrupt disappearance straight from their own mouths. It struck him as rather anticlimactic. It turned out that they had simply grown too powerful for the average world. In other words, after crossing the threshold from Archmage to Warlock, they had left behind the constraints of mortality, essentially reaching the next level, which was a demigod or at least something close to such a being. Naturally, that would mean the supreme rank, which followed the Warlock realm, reached the domain of gods, and Merlin himself admitted as much, well, sort of, in a roundabout way. Without elaborating, he casually remarked that a supreme rank mage possessed enough power to quite literally reshape an entire planet, whether through creation or annihilation. If that did not count as cosmic level, then what would? Merlin also simplified how the universe classified extraordinary beings into different tiers, similar to how mages had their own ranks. Basically, Archmagi were the pinnacle of mortal capabilities, Warlock was a demigod, and the supreme rank aligned with beings who were revered as gods. There were also higher levels, quite a bit according to him, but for no other reason than the fact that such knowledge was unnecessary for the four people at this point, he did not elaborate any further. But with all that revelation, a single shared thought rose in everyone's mind except Maverick's. Why, with all that power, did Merlin and the four founders allow the magical world to grow so decadent over the centuries? Couldn't they have ended the discrimination or the conflict, call it whatever, between the small magical population and the vast Muggle masses, if not through negotiation then through firm coercion, so magicals did not have to hide like cornered rats? Of course, they also understood there would be resistance, and rightly so, but what of it? What could opposition, no matter how massive the numbers, amount to in the face of absolute power? Time was the best healer, and even if the early years had been turbulent, wouldn't the world have grown accustomed to magicals by now if action had been taken a millennium ago? It was a logical question, and neither the ancient wizard nor his students took offense at it. Yet the answer Merlin gave once again left the three mages baffled about the world they thought they knew. It turned out that the earth hid far, far more than they had ever been led to believe. In Merlin's narration, he was not the only supreme-level being on this planet, and certainly not the most powerful. The Sorcerer Supreme was one, and the ancient wizard gave a few more examples, beings who were quite literally immortal and wielded god-level powers. It intrigued Maverick as well, and he recognized a few familiar names from the ancient wizard, like the Yoruba gods of Wakanda and the Eternals. Yes, apparently Merlin knew about them too. There were also some he was not familiar with, such as beings named Chernabog and Gia, and gods who did not exactly reside on Earth but had avatars here, like the deities of celestial Heliopolis, in other words, the Egyptian gods, the Ennead. Maverick wasn't surprised, nonetheless. After all, he had knowledge from beyond the fourth wall and knew that Marvel's lore ran as deep as a black hole, not to mention, this universe was a total clusterfuck of who knows what other universes. So basically, the reason Merlin and his students did not intervene or try to resolve matters between Muggles and Magicals was simple. If they were to coerce the majority of Earth's sentient population, it would cross a major line, conflicting not with just one, but with many god-level and demigod-level beings residing on the planet. They might not mind even if Merlin played monarch among the magical populace, but going beyond, that would be inviting catastrophic-level trouble. As for the reason behind their disappearance from history, it was essentially simple. For lack of a better word, they let the natural order play out, hoping that one day everything would resolve itself without crossing the red lines of other powerful beings. And so, they distanced themselves from the ordinary world, waiting quietly, becoming ghosts lost to the annals of history until that day arrived. Dumbledore, McGonagall, and Flitwick kept nodding as if they understood, but Maverick, of course, called it nonsense internally. He still remembered Merlin mentioning some kind of prophecy and knew there was more to their disappearance than that. Still, he did not raise the matter. It was not his place to question, and nodded along as if he believed it too. Besides, the last thing he wanted to discuss was some bullshit prophecy. On top of responding to the flood of inquiries, the four founders didn't hold back in their explanations, revealing a wealth of knowledge. One key topic they covered was the warlock rank, particularly how it stood apart from the archmage rank below it. They explained that a warlock's lifespan, or more accurately their genetic life level, increases exponentially compared to an archmage. By this measure, they could stand alongside Asgardians. Well, at least a typical Asgardian soldier, in terms of physical capability alone, and essentially surpass them, since a mage's abilities extended far beyond mere physical strength. A warlock's control over magic, in their experience, basically became instinctual. Casting spells without wands was apparently as effortless as drinking water. However, they did point out that wands still made a noticeable difference, especially when conjuring particularly complex spells. Naturally, their reservoir of magical energy also received an exponential boost. In other words, it would take a very long time for a mage of warlock rank to exhaust themselves of mana. Out of the many revelations, one in particular caught the four juniors off guard, and yes, it surprised Maverick too. Apparently, when a mage reached the warlock realm, they awakened an ability that existed outside the traditional system of magic, something the founders referred to as nature affinity. Fire, water, air, and earth. They explained that stepping into the warlock realm granted mastery over one of these elements, and they stressed that this ability worked without magic, which meant it stood as a power all on its own. Even if a situation arose where magic could not be used, the power of nature could still be wielded. Out of the four warlocks, two awakened fire, Gryffindor and Slytherin, while Ravenclaw awakened wind and Hufflepuff awakened water. For some reason, the power of earth did not appear among them. While the four founders continued speaking, Maverick kept his face carefully neutral. Inside, however, his mind spun with confusion. He already knew about elemental affinities, or, as his system phrased it, nature energy manipulation. The thing was, he did not control just one element but every single one of them, which was precisely why their explanation threw him for a loop. So basically, he mused, that made him some cheap knockoff of an avatar. No, that's not right. If anything, he was anything but cheap. With his current arsenal of endless abilities, he could, or should probably, solo the entire Avatar universe right. Anyway, from there, the conversation eased into another topic, focusing on the stories and legends surrounding the founders' names, and then expanding into the lore woven throughout the world. In the end, the one who benefited the most from the gathering was undoubtedly the headmaster. Merlin had pointed out earlier that Dumbledore stood only a single step away from ascending to warlock rank, and throughout the meeting, he gained valuable insight from the four founders, particularly their experiences when they broke through that same boundary. Merlin added his own explanations as well, and truthfully, half the gathering felt like a lecture, with one side asking endless questions and the other patiently clearing their doubts. Finally, the meeting drew to a close when Dumbledore, McGonagall, and Flitwick appeared to have run out of things to discuss. Or at least, that was how it seemed. Without a doubt, they still had a mountain of questions they wanted to ask, but they knew better than to push their luck and risk coming across as rude, even though the four founders and Merlin had shown no signs of impatience the entire time. After all, the entire meeting had begun because Maverick wanted to flex his backing, and his point had been addressed shortly after the discussion started. From there, more than half a day had passed with everyone sitting and simply talking, and more talking. Making a poor first impression was the last thing they wanted. These were the four founders of Hogwarts, after all, the very architects of their school, and Merlin was, well, Merlin. Still, the headmaster respectfully offered to have lunch prepared for them before they left, but the offer was declined with equal courtesy. Soon after, the legends departed from the school, leaving behind only a promise that they could be summoned whenever the need arose. Of course, it went without saying that this did not apply to casual conversations, and the real meaning was clear to everyone present. They could summon the founders only during situations that had slipped beyond their control. This, of course, did not include Maverick, and he had a feeling he would be facing the old fossils sooner rather than later. Dumbledore, McGonagall, and Flitwick might not know, but Maverick was certain that Merlin was well aware of his side project, because for some reason, it aligned with the prophecy the old wizard had told him long ago. Anyway, he would deal with it when the time came. For now, his focus was on the present, finishing the year and getting the exams ready. I suppose there's no need to say that what happened earlier today stays between the four of us, right? After the founders and Merlin himself departed, Maverick, McGonagall, and Flitwick followed Dumbledore to his office, as the old man had suggested, for a cup of afternoon tea. Setting down his cup, McGonagall gave a sharp, brilliant smile and huffed softly through her nose. "I am very much restraining myself from calling you boy, Professor Caesar. Who do you think we are?" "You, Professor, is the head of the house, where mouths outrun brains faster than owls can fly." "Ha ha ha," Flitwick laughed out loud. Clearly, his mood was jolly at the moment, but he swallowed the rest of the laughter bubbling in his gut when he saw the stern lady glare sharply back at him. "That's right, Professor Caesar. Shame on you to think we would go announcing we had the fortune to meet the biggest legends in the history of the magical world," he said firmly, although his expression showed otherwise. "All jesting aside, Professor Caesar is not entirely wrong in bringing it up," Dumbledore chimed in, a gleaming, mischievous twinkle dancing in his eyes and a gentle smile tugging at his lips. "We would do well to keep it to ourselves. On the brighter side, we can quietly savor the pleasure of knowing we have been party to such a remarkably fortuitous encounter as we are doing now. Perhaps gather for tea every weekend." I'd rather not," Maverick rolled his eyes. Then his expression hardened. "On a serious note, headmaster, professors, I take it now, we're all on the same page regarding my arrangements for next year." Noticing his serious expression, the others also fell into a similar mood. A quiet pause hung over the headmaster's office before Dumbledore nodded thoughtfully, and after a moment asked, "Then, I suppose, following the plan you detailed, the next course of action is retrieving the Hufflepuff artifact from Gringotts." Maverick nodded and glanced at the others to gauge their reactions, only to find Flitwick giving him a curious, strange look. "Yes, Professor?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. The half-man hummed thoughtfully before replying, "You didn't think to ask Lady Hufflepuff herself whether she could summon it. After all, it is her house's heirloom." "Maverick." "No," McGonagall interjected. "Best to stick with your original plan, Professor Caesar. With your abilities, I'm sure it won't be difficult, too. Take a little stroll through that place." Maverick nodded, conceding the point. Yes, best not involve the founders in this matter, and besides, it really wouldn't be difficult for him, just as McGonagall had said, to take a stroll there without anyone noticing. Leaning back, he couldn't help but shot McGonagall a teasing glance. "Of all the things I thought I'd see in my life, never did I imagine Professor Minerva McGonagall endorsing a bank heist." Bam! Chapter 265, The Boy Who Shall Live ch. 285. To most, the month of May also passed quietly, and the 1993-1994 academic year drew to a close under soft warmth and gentle skies. The exam weeks, too, came and went, humming with their familiar energy. Students in a rush with parchments clutched and quills tucked behind ears murmuring spells or checking notes one last time while teachers walked the corridors, offering reminders or sharp glances to keep the castle in quiet, careful order. That said, after everything settled, the atmosphere changed completely, separating the school into two groups. There were those who hesitated, second-guessing and waiting quietly for their results, and then there were the few, bold enough to embrace the moment, who had already started arranging their holiday plans. Today, an even gentler warmth filled the skies above Hogwarts, accompanied by a mild breeze that drifted along the ancient walls with perfect ease. It was the final day, with the practicals completed and the last written exam for the final batch of subjects having finished only moments earlier. Students poured out of the exam rooms in a rush of every expression imaginable, and one trio in particular stood out above the rest. "Dad said he already got tickets for all of us from the first-class platform. Can you believe it? First class. Ron had already forgotten he had even left an exam room, acting as if the results would never arrive. Hermione Granger, on the other hand, looked as though her entire life were flashing before her eyes, while Harry rested between the two extremes, appearing calm and confident. In spite of that contrast, the three still moved in perfect sync through the sea of students and stopped beneath the shade of a tree, where they settled on an empty bench. Sirius told me he also has a surprise waiting for me. I bet it has something to do with the World Cup finals. Harry shrugged nonchalantly, thinking for a moment, then pulled 3 cold soda cans from his storage ring, the metal hissing lightly in the sun, and passed them to his friends. Hermione absent-mindedly took hers, opened it with a click, and without a word, gulped down half the can. She exhaled as if a massive burden had lifted from her shoulders, and clarity returned to her eyes. She glanced sideways, although her eyes were already halfway rolled. I am genuinely baffled that neither of you seems worried about the results. Especially you, she said, glaring at the redhead beside her. Is Quidditch all that goes on in your head? Her permanent stance, however, did not faze Weasley this time. What are you on about now? He didn't hold back and even mirrored her by rolling his eyes. Is racking your brain over the exams now going to change anything? Hearing his best buddy's comment, Harry couldn't help but chuckle aloud. What? He asked, looking at Hermione, who was now giving him a pointed glare. He's got a point, you know. Miss Know-it-all gave a final huff and leaned back as the odds were 2 against 1. Anyway, it wasn't a serious quarrel and was only another everyday episode for the trio. And just then, from the corner of her eye, she spotted a familiar figure walking with a few witches, and before she knew it, her hand was already up waving. Jean. The girl in question turned at the call of her name, confusion melting into delight when she saw who it was. She murmured something to the people beside her, slipped out from their circle, and made her way toward them at a quick pace. Hermione, Harry and... If it isn't my long-lost sister. Ron pulled a teasing face and shuffled to the side to make room for her. Jean rolled her eyes and dropped into the spot between them, snatching the cold soda can from Hermione's hand. Don't even start. She took a slow slurp, sighed, and grumbled. It's annoying enough that half the castle keeps calling me Jean Weasley. Without mercy, the trio laughed at her misery, and the redhead's eye twitched as if it had a life of its own. All right, stop teasing her, Hermione said, though she was giggling just as badly as the other two. I've been meaning to ask, how did all of that even start? It's that fat snake from the Ivory family, Jean replied, flicking her hair back as if the memory itself was beneath her. Guess she was jealous I was better than anyone in my grade but had nothing to use against me, so she called me a Weasley bastard. Hermione gasped, covering her mouth. She actually called you a bastard. Jean wiggled her fingers dismissively. Anyway, I showed the snakes what it means to be a protégé, hung the morons upside down in some forgotten corridor before they were eventually found by someone. Hermione gasped again, louder this time, leaning in as if she had just witnessed a crime. You, so it was you. Merlin, the whole school was searching for the culprit. How did you not get caught? Forget that, Jean, I'm your biggest fan from now on. Harry laughed so hard he slapped his knee. Exactly, Ron added, cackling with delight. Why didn't I think of that? It's way better than hexing a tongue lock or making those stupid snakes vomit frogs. Ron wasn't boasting at all. Unlike in the original story, where dumb luck usually dragged him out of trouble, he now had the capital to back up most of his claims after grinding through Maverick's training plan for 3 years. Stop it, Hermione exclaimed, pointing accusingly at them with the seriousness of someone twice her age. What if she gets caught? Do not encourage her to be like you too. Harry leaned forward with a dramatic bow. So how did you avoid getting caught? Teach us, Master Yoda. Jean pressed her palms together with sudden sage-like calm. Ah, young Padawan, simple it is. Caught, I would be, or humiliated, they would be by a little witch. Which do you think they'd choose? Ron copied Harry's bow. I see, wise you are, Master. Jean let out a small laugh, ending the drama. All right, I've got to ask, how do you wizards even know about Star Wars? Professor Caesar showed all the movies in Muggle science, Hermione replied, rubbing her chin. He claimed it was compulsory cultural knowledge. For science, whatever that actually means. Isn't Muggle science only from 6th year? Jean raised a brow. It is, but students from all grades join whenever something interesting comes up. Even some professors join in. The whole classroom ends up packed. Ah, I always figured it was just boring basic science. Didn't know it could actually be interesting. Jean grinned, eyes shining. Next year, I'm totally going to check it out. Speaking of next year, Hermione said, nudging her gently with an elbow, anything fun planned for the summer? Jean tapped her chin, thinking, not really, probably traveling. Same here, Hermione sighed, looking genuinely let down. From Ron's side of the bench came a hopeful spark. How about watching the World Cup finals with us then? He leaned in like someone offering a rare treasure. Watch Quidditch for who knows how long? I'll pass. Jean replied immediately, decisive enough to make Ron wince. Harry lifted a finger. It's not just Quidditch, it's the World Cup finals. There'll be fireworks and loads of fun activities too. Yeah, and it's practically a camping trip, Ron added quickly. We never know how long the match is gonna last. I heard this year's entertainment section is supposed to be something special. The girls paused, exchanging a look. Put like that, it really did sound tempting. Jean sighed. Even if I want to go, who's going to take me there? Can't you ask Professor Caesar? Hermione offered. Jean gave her a look. Professor Caesar is not my nanny, Hermione. He's already doing a lot for me, considering I live on another continent. Knowing him, I'm sure his summer is completely packed. Harry lifted his head, thinking aloud. I could go with Sirius to pick you up from America. Jean's eyes brightened instantly. Ooh, is it that handsome criminal uncle from the news back then? Harry's eye twitched as he stared at her. I don't know about handsome, but he was indeed a criminal once, wrongfully convicted though. Hermione nodded firmly, chiming in. Jean's not wrong, she added, jabbing the redhead playfully before glancing at Harry. Your godfather is practically the #1 bachelor in all of Wizarding Britain, maybe even the whole Wizarding world. Right, Jean grinned at Hermione, then leaned toward Harry, eyes sparkling with curiosity. So, is he picking you up at the train station? Harry winced. About that. He scratched the back of his head as he suddenly remembered something. I've been meaning to tell you, I won't be joining the train back home. I have to stay for a few more days. At his words, the entire group turned to him with synchronized suspicion, even Ron. They were well aware that much of their training under Maverick happened because of Harry, and that Harry, unlike them, also received some private tutoring. Well, private tutoring was mostly their suspicion, since every now and then, after practice, Maverick would keep Harry behind and dismiss them. What else could it be for? Is Professor Caesar keeping you behind for extra special training or something? Ron asked, speaking the question on everyone's mind. No, Harry waved both hands quickly. It's not Professor Caesar. Headmaster Dumbledore asked me to stay, though Professor Caesar was there as well. Apparently it's something about my parents and... He lowered his voice, eyes flicking around. Well, Voldemort. You know who, Ron yelped. SHHH, Ronald, Hermione hissed, almost smacking him. Yes, you know who. So I'm sorry, guys, I can't join you on the train. That's all right, Harry, Hermione said gently. She understood that he would share everything when he was ready. Especially anything involving his parents, it was Harry's private matter, and it was only right to respect that. Trying to steer them away from the awkward topic, Harry brightened again, glancing in Jean's direction. Once I'm home, I'll ask Sirius to go pick you up from America. I'll call first, of course. Pick me up too, Hermione added. If Jean is going, I'll join as well. I'll tell my mum and dad. Maybe they'll even come along. Brilliant. It's settled then. We're all going to the finals. Ron looked as if someone had delivered his life's wish on a silver platter. To him, Quidditch was the highest priority, and sharing it with his best friends was simply perfect. Time slipped by before any of them noticed. 2 days later, the results were announced, and, as expected, the school erupted into a wild assortment of emotions. Another 2 days later, the Owl and Newt results were released as well, officially closing the academic year. As always, the year-end feast was held in grand style. The House Cup, surprisingly, went to Gryffindor, with Slytherin, last year's winners, coming second, followed by Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff. This year, though, the scores were closer than usual, with no more than 20 points separating them. The headmaster ended his speech in an unusual way, leaving everyone buzzing with curiosity when he hinted that next year would bring a major surprise. Finally, on Thursday of the third week of June, the Hogwarts Express departed from Hogsmeade Station, ferrying students home and leaving the castle wrapped in a rare, peaceful quiet after months of bustling activity. Yet not every student was on the train. As it disappeared from view, Harry, the only one left behind, followed his alchemy professor up the spiral staircase to the headmaster's office for the appointment they had arranged a couple of weeks ago. Chapter 266, The Boy Who Shall Live ch 286. Sirius, since when did you arrive? When Harry stepped into the old headmaster's office, his eyes immediately found the black-haired figure sitting opposite Dumbledore, and he recognized him in an instant even from behind. The man in question turned, a brilliant smile lighting his face as he stood up just as Harry rushed forward and threw his arms around him. I've actually been here since yesterday. How are you holding up, kiddo? Ruffling the boy's hair, Sirius gestured for Harry to sit on his right, and from behind, Maverick walked over and took the seat on Sirius's other side. Brilliant, school's over and I can't wait for the holidays. What do you mean you've been here since yesterday? How come I never saw you? In his excitement at seeing his godfather, Harry fired off a rapid stream of questions, completely forgetting where he was or that other people were in the room as well. Then a quiet cough sounded, and Dumbledore cleared his throat to gently remind him he had company. I arranged for Mr. Black to come early, Harry. There were matters he needed to understand beforehand, since he now holds the role of your magical guardian. Apologies, headmaster. Harry finally realized he might have gotten a bit carried away. He scratched the back of his head, thinking for a moment, then asked, Is this related to what you wanted to talk to me about? About Voldemort? Yes, Headmaster Dumbledore and your professor have already explained everything, Sirius said before Dumbledore could respond. They've told me about your particular situation. Looking at Harry, his face took on a grave seriousness, making it clear this was no simple matter. Seeing the change, Harry also mirrored his godfather's expression, then turned his gaze to the older man across from him. I still have no idea what this is all about, he said, but anything involving Voldemort is never going to be good. Still, I'm ready, headmaster. Please explain what this important matter is. Dumbledore's eyes twinkled with approval at Harry's quick composure. That amateur little boy has grown remarkably, he thought, muttering, good, before turning to Maverick. Professor Caesar, perhaps you could explain everything in a way he might better understand. If you would. Maverick let out a small eye roll at being dumped the task, but he said nothing. Better this way. The old man can't string two phrases together without sounding cryptic anyway. He, on the other hand, resolved to be clear and honest with the kid, steering away from the original story's outcome, where Harry stayed in the dark until the final moment, and even Snape remarked that he had been raised like a pig for slaughter. Once all eyes turned to him, he started explaining everything. It was much the same as what he and Dumbledore had told Sirius. Sirius had been brought in early to keep him from losing his temper in front of Harry. And it had been the right decision, because the night before, once everything was explained to the former fugitive, he had let loose some truly impressive language. Couldn't really blame him. After all, having something like a soul fragment, the very madman who had killed his best friends, parasitizing his beloved godson, was not something he could simply accept. Of course, he wasn't angry at the latter two for keeping it. His frustration came from feeling helpless and from the worry that weighed on his heart for Harry. His temper only intensified when he realized the extreme danger Harry had had to face. Maverick and Dumbledore had explained everything, at least as much as they understood about Harry's complicated situation. The Horcrux inside Harry was a fragment of Voldemort's soul, and its destruction was inherently tied to Harry's life. The thought that his godson might have had to confront Voldemort directly, and that the process could kill him, left Sirius seething. It was risky in every imaginable way, and honestly, a huge if as to whether it would even work. Eventually, though, when he learned that an alternative solution had been found, he finally calmed down. First of all, Maverick began, understand this, Harry. You are just a boy. Even if you had known certain things, there was nothing you could do except worry needlessly, and that would have affected your everyday life. That is why, he paused, glancing at Dumbledore. That is why Headmaster Dumbledore kept this from you. Surprisingly, Harry didn't interrupt. He simply listened, though the confusion on his face made it clear he was struggling to piece things together. Maverick made sure not to linger unnecessarily. It all started when you were born, more precisely, on the day Voldemort supposedly died. For the first time in his life, Harry Potter learned the truth, the whole truth. About the prophecy that had driven the madman to kill his parents, the way that event had shaped Voldemort's eventual downfall, and most importantly, the complex circumstances Harry himself now faced. Maverick spared no detail. He told Harry about the Horcruxes, their connection to him, and above all, the Horcrux that he himself had unwittingly become. He went on to explain how Dumbledore had spent years searching for a way to remove the parasite from Harry, how the headmaster had even risked his own life in the process, and, of course, the initial, incredibly risky solution that had been considered for Harry to rid himself of the curse. Needless to say, realizing he carried a piece of Voldemort inside him, the very monster who had killed his parents, terrified Harry to his core. Not because he feared Riddle, but because having a fragment of Voldemort's soul within him could endanger his friends at any moment. Perhaps it was the Gryffindor in him, but the boy had shown no cowardice when he first learned that the original solution required confronting Voldemort directly. Still, he was visibly relieved to hear that a foolproof method had finally been discovered to free him from the curse, and that it could be carried out immediately. Of course, there are still a lot of uncertainties, and I'm honestly struggling to wrap my head around all the details myself, Maverick continued. But yes, ultimately, that was the idea. You duel him, he kills you, and somehow you survive while he doesn't. Mother magic works in mysterious ways. I'm no expert in that area, Headmaster's far more knowledgeable than I am. I shall gladly offer you my personal library on soul magic, Professor, should you wish to delve into that field, Dumbledore said, with a small smile. I'll pass on that, Headmaster. Besides, there's no need to worry about it anymore, Maverick replied. What about after? Harry asked suddenly. After the Horcrux inside me is destroyed, he'll still be alive, right? Will he come back to life in a new body? That part's actually simple, Maverick said. In fact, we want him to regain a physical body. Killing a fully formed Tom Riddle is easy for us. It's his cockroach-like wraith form that makes everything complicated. Remember your first year, Professor Quirrell? That was Voldemort's wraith parasitizing his body. Back then, I tried to destroy it, but it slipped away. A wraith is extremely difficult to deal with because it's intangible, incredibly fast, and can escape almost at will. That's why we're letting him revive properly, as it's far easier to destroy him physically than to deal with a wraith. Well, that part was only half true. Now that he had access to sorcery, Maverick had countless ways to obliterate Voldemort's wraith, but there was no reason for them to know any of that, nor was it important anymore. After all, Voldemort's revival now served a far greater purpose for Maverick. Which brings to the next complicated matter Maverick had to explain to Harry, Voldemort's resurrection. When Maverick had first told Sirius about it, needless to say, the man had been royally furious and rejected the idea outright. However, after hours of negotiation with Dumbledore vouching for the plan and Maverick detailing the countless precautions to keep Harry safe, Sirius finally, reluctantly, agreed. In truth, Maverick really didn't want to involve Harry in the plan, but without the kid, blood of Voldemort's greatest enemy, the scheme wouldn't even get off the ground next year. The next step, then, was to explain everything to Harry. Yes, even though he was still a child, there was no other choice but to fill him in on everything. After all, from the beginning, Harry had been a core part of the plan, and Maverick would rather keep him informed than manipulate him in the dark. Besides, having personally been his mentor for the past 3 years, he trusted the boy to some extent. At the very least, he was confident that the kid could keep his mouth shut when he insisted. Another half-hour passed. Contrary to what the adults in the room expected, Harry showed no worry or fear. In fact, he looked almost thrilled after Maverick finished explaining everything, particularly when he learned the part he would play. as expected of a Gryffindor. Right then, shall we move on to resolving your parasitic problem next? Maverick glanced from Harry to Dumbledore, signaling it was time. The ritual had already been prepared in advance, and with only Harry remaining as the final piece, they could get started at any moment. Chapter 267, The Boy Who Shall Live III, ch. 287. Hogwarts, Chamber of Secrets. Whoosh, crackle, crackle, whoosh. A violent surge of wind spiraled through the ancient chamber, twisting the stale air into a raging vortex, tearing cold droplets and drifting dust from the stone and sending them spinning into the air. At the center of the chaos, a young boy floated half a meter above the damp floor, his limbs and head hanging limp as if sleep had claimed him completely. Beneath him, a pentagram star burned with a vivid blue glow while arcs of lightning cracked and curled around his suspended form. Around the circle, two figures stood with their arms raised toward the floating boy. Their voices rose in an ancient chant that merged with the storm of magic around them, while their robes snapped and twisted against the raging current. What was happening at this time was a magical ritual. The boy, unconscious, was Harry Potter, the target of the magical formation, and the two figures were obviously Dumbledore and Maverick, guiding the flow of magic and the ritual itself. Under normal circumstances, a magical ritual functioned like a carefully conducted orchestra, with the ritual's magic following the will of its target. But Harry knew nothing about channeling magic in such a structured form. He had no understanding of magical currents, spell resonance, or the intricate demands of magic this complex. Therefore, Dumbledore and Maverick put the boy to sleep before beginning, having no intention of letting him take charge from the very start. Meanwhile, a lone figure remained at the far wall, half-shadowed by the dim blue flashes bursting through the chamber. The stone pressed against his back felt cold and slick, yet sweat traced down his face in slow trails that soaked his collar. Each burst of wild magic rolled across the room and struck him with a thud that stole part of his breath. Even so, he kept his eyes fixed on the scene before him, unwilling to blink, unwilling to miss a single moment. The weight on his expression had little to do with fear of the magic swirling through the air, and instead came from the terrible knot tightening in his chest as he watched the boy at the center of it all, still and pale and helpless in the rising storm. His godson, Harry Potter. Half an hour had crawled by since the ritual began. At first, Sirius had been amazed by the legendary Chamber of Secrets, but the purpose of their arrival quickly sobered him. He followed like a background character, saw Maverick and Dumbledore explaining the small amount Harry needed to know, and guiding him to the center of the intricately drawn diagram. Meanwhile, he was asked to step back to avoid any unforeseen complications. He didn't protest, moving to the edge of the chamber and watching as Harry lay down, trusting them completely. And once Harry was settled, Maverick and Dumbledore put him to sleep, and the ritual began without a moment's delay. Presently, the energy in the air thickened and vibrated, as if it had reached its peak. The glowing star beneath the boy pulsed brighter than ever, its light spilling across the stone like a rising tide. Minutes stretched on, each one dragging like an eternity for Sirius. He wanted to step forward, to ask if everything was all right, but he held himself back, knowing that any interference might do more harm than satisfy his curiosity. At least the expressions on the faces of the two archmagi had not changed. They looked focused, unchanged from the very beginning. He forced himself to calm down, raising his arm to shield his face from the gushing waves of magic, when suddenly a shrill, inhuman screech ripped through the chamber, making his eardrums ache. He moved his hand, and his eyes widened at the sight. Thick trails of dark smoke burst from his godson's unconscious mouth like hoses let loose, while his body convulsed violently, as if struck by a sudden seizure. Has something gone wrong? Worry and fear for his godson hit his chest like a train, and instinctively he took a step forward, only to be slammed back the next second as a gust of something invisible struck him, throwing him against the damp wall. Groaning, he got to his feet, pressing one arm against his ear as the screech ahead felt like it was clawing at his brain from within. He lifted his head and saw that the situation had not changed. That eerie, dark substance was still pouring from Harry, not just his mouth, but his nose and even his eyes, while his body convulsed uncontrollably. Meanwhile, the two archmagi continued chanting in that unknown tongue, their posture and expressions unchanged. If something were going wrong, surely at least their faces would betray it, wouldn't they? He had been warned from the very start not to get close, and his earlier movement had been purely instinct. Still, the sight of his godson like that strained him to the limit, barely keeping him in check. Only reason held his racing heart in place, forcing him to stay where he was and trust the two of them to handle the process. And so he waited, each second stretching into what felt like hours. He clenched his fist and lifted his eyes toward the disturbing thing above. The eerie dark substance pouring from Harry was gathering into a dark, jelly-like blob that hovered right over him and the ritual circle. The sight felt wrong. Faces seemed to push through its surface for a brief moment, like drowning people breaking through the water before sinking again. Then, suddenly, his head snapped back to Harry when the screeching that had been ringing through the chamber came to an abrupt stop. His thumping heart finally eased a little as he saw the dark smoke pouring from his godson begin to subside as well. Was it over? He wanted to step forward again, but this time he managed to control his instincts. The chanting had stopped as well, and he soon saw the kid across from Dumbledore make a series of gestures in the air, his head raised. Whatever he was doing, the target was obviously the blob of darkness. And sure enough, in the next moment he saw a sparkling ribbon of orange form around the blob of darkness like a net, swiftly wrapping around it like a cage. Then it convulsed inward, shrinking and shrinking, until it was no bigger than a small quaffle. "It's done." Lowering his arms, Maverick spoke in a low, steady voice, his eyes fixed on the thing now sealed tightly in its glowing cage. "I had assumed we would destroy it. What is the purpose of sealing it instead?" Dumbledore's brows furrowed. At the same time, almost absent-mindedly, he conjured a small bed with a sweep of his hand and laid Harry's unconscious body onto it with gentle care. "I need to confirm something first." Maverick's gaze settled on Harry as he spoke, a faint gleam rising in his eyes, having thought of something. "Let's do a diagnosis first. I'll elaborate on the matter later." "Black, you can come over now." Some time later, Headmaster Dumbledore let the Elder Wand drop, while Maverick withdrew the spells of sorcery enveloping Harry, and both exhaled in unison, relaxing their shoulders. "Is Harry okay? Did the ritual work? Why is he still unconscious?" Sirius couldn't hold his tongue and fired a barrage of questions in a single breath, his eyes darting between the two and his godson lying prone on the conjured mattress. "The boy is fine, Sirius. Not a trace of the Dark Lord remains now." Dumbledore's lips curved into a faint smile as he turned his gaze to Maverick. "Isn't that right, Professor?" Humming, Maverick nodded. Aside from being drained of all magic, the kid should live. He paused and chuckled, making Dumbledore raise an eyebrow and Sirius release a long sigh. "The boy who lived. Well, the boy who shall live fits more accurately, doesn't it?" "Ah, indeed." Dumbledore glanced down at Harry, a melancholy expression settling over his face. "Today, it feels as though a great burden has been lifted from this old man's shoulders. 13 years, and now, at least, I have the courage to face James and Lily and apologize." Sirius crouched down and caressed Harry's head. "How I wish James and Lily were here." "All right, let's move on to the next matter at hand," Maverick interjected, holding back the urge to roll his eyes. It wasn't that he didn't understand their feelings or lacked sympathy, but it was time to move on. "Here," he said, drawing 3 bottles from his storage ring and handing them to Sirius, who looked at him in puzzlement. "Start with the red, follow with the blue, and finish with the green. Feed him at 5-minute intervals." "What are they?" "Magic, internal injuries, and stamina." Without pausing, he added, "Take him back." "No, keep him here, just move, back up to the side until we're done dealing with the Dark Lord's soul fragment." If Sirius happened to be carrying Harry's unconscious body through the corridors and crossed paths with another professor, and God forbid if that professor was Snape, it would definitely end in a homicide. Moments later, as soon as Sirius backed up with Harry, Maverick waved his hand and the sealed piece of Voldemort's soul became visible again, and his expression fixed solemnly on it. "Perhaps you would care to elaborate now, Professor. What precisely is it you intend to do?" Without sparing the old man a glance, Maverick rose from the ground, folding his legs into a cross-legged posture midair. His hands then began moving in deliberate stances, and gradually, sparks of orange started materializing at points around the sealed soul until it was fully surrounded, connected by solid strings of energy. The only difference now was that the space inside had grown larger. Rather than the simple seal he had cast on Riddle's soul fragment before, it now functioned as both a seal and a cage, allowing the fragment to move but not escape. Once the new barrier was in place, Maverick dissolved the old seal, and as expected, the soul shard lunged forward immediately, only to slam against the invisible walls of its new cage. Bam! Bam! Again and again it slammed, but the radiant cage of sorcery held firm, no matter which angle it tried to escape from. Harry is the last Horcrux riddle created, intentionally or not. Nodding in satisfaction, Maverick finally began explaining his purpose to Dumbledore, all the while his hands never stopped moving, clearly channeling more spells. Until now, we have destroyed the soul fragments held inside Riddle's diary, Marvolo Gaunt's ring, Slytherin's locket, and Ravenclaw's diadem. That makes 4, and this, he gestured with his head to the mass of darkness, the 5th. There's also Hufflepuff's cup, which I will take care of soon, so if you count that along with the Wraith, which is the main soul of Riddle still at large, that makes 7, right? Dumbledore hummed, hand resting on his chin. 7, exactly. It aligns with our expectations, considering Tom's fixation on the number and also the divination you received, he added, casting a faintly skeptical glance toward Maverick. Maverick's brows twitched slightly. He did dump the how of a lot of things as divination. After all, he can't exactly say he has knowledge beyond the fourth wall. Whatever, he shrugged internally and with a straight face continued to bullshit his way forward. Yes, but since Harry was an unintentional Horcrux, there should be one more, right? I am fairly certain his goal was to keep one piece in his own body and place 6 pieces in Horcruxes. However, because of that unintended mistake, the actual number of soul fragments might be 8, including the loose piece of his soul that is still wandering as a wraith. At those words, Dumbledore's brows lifted, and a torrent of thoughts rushed through his mind. Indeed, the old wizard thought, the possibility of that is very high. No, almost certain. With that thought, he fixed his gaze on Maverick, who was still focused on whatever he was doing, dancing his hands and fingers. In the divination you mentioned back then, I recall you mentioned a serpent. That is what I am about to find out, Headmaster. His hands spread, and in the same breath he pulled them back and pushed them forward again, his thumb and index fingers touching to form a triangle. Until now, I have not been able to locate this so-called serpent. In the divination I received, I only saw a brief vision of a snake that resembled a venomous viper crawling through the woods, which was not helpful at all. I gather, then, that whatever you plan to do is meant to reveal the serpent's whereabouts. Sort of, Maverick replied. There's a particular spell in the system of sorcery that I practiced a bit more than usual, thinking it might come in handy. It's similar to legilimency, which lets you access someone's mind, but the difference is that legilimency works on souls still bound to their bodies, whereas the spell I'm about to use is specifically designed for astral bodies. Astral body? Dumbledore inquired, his eyes twinkling with curiosity. Basically, one's astral form is their mind's vehicle in non-physical realms, while the soul is the fundamental spiritual self. There's a difference, but at the same time, a similarity too. Maverick didn't go into detail and continued, I'm hoping the spell works in this case since, well, this is a soul and not really a physical body. He paused, then added, I'll be entering the mirror dimension now. If it works, I should find the memory quickly since I know exactly what I'm looking for. If it doesn't, well, I'll destroy the soul fragment and be back just as quickly. Dumbledore nodded, though his expression showed he had a bucket load of questions to ask. Maverick did not linger, having said enough, and with a wave of his hand, he enveloped himself along with Riddle's soul fragment, disappearing from the visible reality. His purpose was simple. All this time, he had been acting on knowledge from the memories of his previous life, and he wanted to know for sure if they matched what he knew here. Nagini, for example, he wasn't sure if it was a Horcrux riddle created before or after his resurrection. Even though Maverick had watched all the movies of Harry Potter in his previous life, he didn't remember every single detail, but Riddle's memories could answer the lingering doubts for him. Moreover, if Nagini was a Horcrux created after Riddle's resurrection, things would be much simpler for Maverick, since Riddle would not live long enough in this reality to create it. That would leave only the Hufflepuff Cup, which he plans to deal with as soon as this matter is resolved. Ongoing. This audiobook is in progress and stopped at chapter 267. Xuanhuan members can request an update in the following update request post or by sending me a message.